You know, it happens.
Thanks, Ron.
Are we live, recording and all of those things? Yeah, good. Thumbs up. Oh, 2 thumbs up, even better. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the September 6th, 2024 meeting of the Baltimore Regional Transit Commission. I'm John Larry, the chair. Commissioners, welcome and thank you for being here, of course. Lots of interested parties in attendance. Looking forward to a productive meeting. Lots of important items on the agenda. Want to highlight for everybody that I'm wearing my red shirt, which I bought specifically for the two announcements ago, the initial red line announcement. So I try and wear it every chance I get. It is hopefully soon to be superseded by a sweater. Those of you who haven't seen it, perhaps, is it part of your presentation?
It's not, but you feel free to.
No, you do it. Please, you do it.
No, so MTA is joining the ranks of transit agencies around the country, launching a holiday sweater. So if you missed the pre-order this past weekend, we will be having more sweaters for sale closer to the holidays in November. So keep an eye out from that. We are going to launch a little bit of a retail store. There's a lot of people who like our brand, like our stuff, and so we're going to allow them the opportunity to support and buy things.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we can have a commission photo with everybody wearing holiday sweaters, so
well, it really depends on if it has some bling on it. If it doesn't have bling, I can't.
We'll add bling.
We'll
get some glue guns and figure it out. Anyway, looking forward to it. Okay, so Dawn, anything administrative before we turn it over to the administrator for her update and then on to the budget materials? Okay. Holly, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Next slide. All right, I'm gonna ask Dawn for help here.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. It is great to see everyone this morning. So I have some updates. I know sometimes like there's kind of like no through line on the updates. Just want to share really mostly positive news about some accomplishments that we've had over the past couple of months, some good announcements that we need to share with everyone, just to make sure you're aware. So I'm going to start a very positive announcement that we made an agreement with Virginia Railway Express, BRE, to cross on our tickets. So previously, if you wanted to transfer between MARC and BRE, you would buy a MARC ticket, you would buy a BRE ticket. This agreement allows passengers with a weekly, monthly, or a 10-trip ticket to transfer to BRE at no cost, and they can transfer onto our system. So it means you can go from like Manassas to Baltimore for I think $12, which is way cheaper than driving and tolls and parking. You know, we're working towards longer term investments where we would be able to do run through service and go into Virginia. But in the short term, this is a really good, low, essentially no cost opportunity to make those connections and emphasize the importance of the region and how we can work together as a region. We did make the announcement with the CEO, Rich Dalton from BRE, and our team has a really fantastic partnership with BRE. And so we're excited to continue to push some of these initiatives, marketing, and trying to get more people on transit. We also launched Transit Royale. We always talk about the Transit app and how fantastic that is. We've been pushing our partnership with Transit app for a while. One of the things that we did recently was we purchased an upgrade for everyone in the Baltimore region to the Royale version, which is the premium version in the Transit app. So what that means essentially for a rider is previously you could only see the routes that were closest to you and you couldn't do kind of planning in the future. Now you're able to see all routes in the region. You can do real-time tracking for all of those routes. You can also do planning into the future. You can do some fun stuff in terms of customized themes and personalization. There is now a Maryland flag icon that you can use because we all love our Maryland flag. You can choose other versions if you'd like. It also allows you kind of gamification of transit. So there's leaderboards and things like that. You can change your name, have a fun kind of modal icon on that. So, you know, if you do it, let me know what your icon is. We'll see if we can find you guys on the bus. As part of that, we also increased the number of antennas that we have on our buses. So now all of our buses have 2 antennas on them, which really helps to improve the accuracy of our real-time information, helps to eliminate ghost buses. Ghost buses, when you would see it in the app, but it wouldn't actually come. And so now we have, with that additional antenna, it helps with that. The other thing we did is more information in terms of Metro. It allows you to have kind of walk through step by step. So people with disabilities who want that extra information can use that in with Transit App as well. So we've had some really positive responses. People are excited about it. And so we're thrilled to be able to roll that out. We launched a bus maintenance apprenticeship program. So we've been working on this for a couple of years to get to this point. It's a really fantastic partnership that we have with our union, ATU Local 1300, and the Community College of Baltimore County. So it's a 3-year curriculum provided by CCBC, graduation for this inaugural class in 2027. Applications were accepted through August 30th. I think we got over 200 applications for 10 slots, so it's going to be a tough competition, but I think it speaks to the need for training and on-the-job training. And so we're really excited to get this going later this year. Our Youth Transit Council launched back in earlier this year. And so it's, you know, forum for 14 to 18-year-olds to offer suggestions, let us know how they interact with transit. We had our first kind of class go through that through the spring. It went really well. I've been impressed by the knowledge and depth of experience and suggestions that are coming from the folks in YTC. And so we are putting out applications now for the next cohort through September 20th. We're trying to give them more real stuff. So we want to give them, we're looking at, you know, putting out a rider code of conduct. And one of the things I'm asking the Youth Transit Council to weigh in on is, how should that go out there? How should it look? You know, I want to make sure that what we're putting out speaks to young people, that they respond and react to it. And so we're going to be giving them that to tackle, with the goal of rolling that out for the entire agency early 2025. Speaking of the Red Line, thank you, John, for highlighting that. So we had our Red Line internship program this summer. It was a 6-week paid opportunity for high school students along the East-West corridor. There were specialized mentoring, community outreach activities, field visits. We held our graduation ceremony for this first class on August 1st. And we're looking to expand that program in 2025. So we're already talking to a few different high schools about how we can expand the program and get more students coming through it. And I did want to shout out and give a thank you to BRTC for the letter of support for the TOD grant for the Red Line. We appreciate that. It always helps with our federal partners. Diving into some modal updates. So on Core Bus, our fall service change, which we talked about at a prior meeting, did go into effect August 25th. The Quick Link 40 is now permanent. Our local Link 73 service to Wagner's Point is now permanent. We have improved light rail connections via the local Link 85. I was at light rail the other day and talking to a bus operator, and he's like, this is fantastic. We're able to get people to light rail. So the feedback there has been really, really good. In terms of our on-time performance and cut service, you know, the first couple of weeks of a new service change are always a little bumpy, but it's been pretty good. So I've been impressed with how the current on-time performance is, how our cut service is fairly stable. And so we're looking to build off of this because this is our longest service change. And so how we can continue to improve and especially the on-time performance. On the bus kind of purchase side, so we did a year of bus buy that was approved by the Board of Public Works July 17th. So that will ensure that we do have buses coming in next year. And again, notable decreases in cut service. July of 2024 was a low of 2.4%, which was down from 8.5% last July and over 12% in early 2024. So we are continuing to see improvements in our service reliability and making sure that we're delivering all the service that we say we're going to.
All of those bus purchases, are they the electric ones?
The purchase that was approved by the Board of Public Works was for 20 electric buses and 50 hybrid buses. On the light rail side, we're always, again, focused on safe and good repair. So we had some track work that was needed in the Central Business District in August. So we did a weekend shutdown that allowed us to go in, really attack the needed improvements. And so we did shuttle bus service between the downtown stations during that. Overall on light rail, we are continuing to see reduced speeds restrictions system-wide. We've been focusing on, again, ensuring that our track is in a state of good repair, that we don't have any kind of black conditions on the rail. We're also prioritizing vehicle availability. I've been fairly public about some of our struggles with the number of vehicles that we have available. And so we're diving in on that, working with our contractor, with our vendor partners in general to ensure we have the right supplies, and with our union on that. We have been supplementing for major games with express shuttles. So the Orioles and the Ravens games do have express buses coming in from Cromwell and Timonium. Those have actually been fairly positive. You can see a positive and negative comment there from Reddit about the express buses, and I think those have been really popular with our riders. On the Metro side, so we're continuing to move forward with our rail car replacement project. We do now have 3 married pairs on site that are undergoing testing. We have an upcoming weekend shutdown for testing, so unfortunately we will have to shut down the entire rail line October 4th to the 7th, but it is for a good reason. It's so that we can go in and test the new trains, test the new signal system. And I also want to note this weekend, we are doing a cutover for our signal system. So switching from the old one to the new one. There may be some impacts, or there likely will be some impacts to our real-time information. So we're putting out information on our service alerts and our stations to the riders to let them know train service shouldn't be impacted, but the real-time information may be. We've also been working on, some of the structural repairs that are needed. So Aerial Pier 2720 at West Cold Spring, we got in and did some platform repairs in early August, 8 weeks of single tracking between West Cold Spring and Rogers Avenue that we have really prioritized to try and get done before this weekend shutdown. And so it's gone really well in terms of working with our partners and our vendors on that. And then just wanted to note, thank you all who attended the facility tours. We enjoyed hosting and kind of showing some of our system. We'd love to do it again in the future. I think that might be one of the topics to determine kind of where and when we do that. So we'd love to show more of the system to you all. And that is all I've got. I'm happy to take any questions.
I'd just say thanks for the tour. It's really helpful. We should do more. We should see different, like we talked about, so see different aspects, see the good, the bad. Just to get, there's no substitute for seeing it. And we met, I also want to commend you, the staff we met and the operations center is incredible. Those folks are working so hard, and it's really their ability to multitask is also really impressive. But and then we met folks, at least in my tour, outreach folks, rider outreach folks and others. So really a very impressive team of all the folks that we encountered, electric bus, and on and on and on. So thank you for arranging those, and we definitely should do those regularly and continue to talk about how to, what's the next best thing to do.
Yep, that sounds great. We'd love to host you, and yeah, the MTA team does amazing work and fantastic. So the OCC in particular is really the heart of the agency. So I just want to shout out the heart.
So are there questions for Holly? Yeah. Otherwise, yes, please.
Yeah, Holly, you talk about the Transit Royale. How far-reaching is that within the service areas of MTA, like the south part of the county, all the way to Annapolis and further north, or just in the middle?
So it should be everywhere that MTA has service. I can confirm, but the 70 goes into Annapolis,
yes.
So it could be geo restricted there.
So with the Royale is a little bit deeper than the regular transit, so we'll pick up the other services for County.
So you may end up getting a free upgrade for your riders as well, just because our service kind of overlaps in that area.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Other questions or comments? Holly, are you doing the performance updates? Are we talking about those, or are they just for?
I'm happy to answer any questions on those. We've been including them as information. I know that there are some changes, so if you want to ask.
Well, I guess I would just ask you whether there's anything in them you wanted to highlight, either with the slides or just
So I can do a quick run through. Core bus to highlight, I mentioned previously, service delivery, our cut service continues to improve. You can see that in the chart here. July is our highest month. Our goal is delivering 99+% of service every day. And there's definitely some days that we're hitting it. We're not there every day, but we're really working towards that. On-time performance, similarly, again, we usually see a dip, and so we're continuing to stay fairly stable. Traffic patterns have changed, school has changed, and so our service development team is looking at our schedule and how we align with that. On the light rail side, again, I've mentioned our vehicle issues, and that is impacting our on-time performance and the availability of real time there with service delivery. So it's something that we're really focused on working to improve. Metro, some slight improvements in service delivery. This again continues to be issues with vehicles. We have a 40-year-old fleet, and we are working really hard every day to keep the fleet running, but it does have some struggles. On the Merck side, I did want to highlight, so on-time performance took a pretty big dip in July. Amtrak in particular is kind of our driver here. They've added some Amtrak service, and they are prioritizing Amtrak service over Merck service. We're looking at our contractual options to push back against that, and we're having daily conversations with them at team levels and at higher levels about needing to prioritize or at least make sure that we're still having our service out there, and so that is an ongoing conversation. Commuter bus, I think I noted previously some of the struggles going into June with our contractors being able to have operators available because the service levels were decreasing a little bit. It has stabilized in July with the new schedules, and we do anticipate that it will continue to stabilize. We've seen some notable improvements there, and we're continuing to work with our contractors on that. And the mobility, again, continued good news story. We are working closely with our vendors. We did make that agreement for them to increase wages for their union employees. And so because of that, we've seen the notable increases in on-time performance there. And then ridership, again, just a huge shout out. We continue to see ridership growing. We hit over 6 million rides in May. July of 24 was quite a bit higher than July of 23. And so we are anticipating October each year is typically one of our highest ridership months. And so we're anticipating fairly high ridership again this fall.
Holly, quick question on that. How is ridership comparing to 2019 levels at this point?
It depends on the mode. I can get you the specifics for that. We're not back to pre-pandemic ridership. Mobility is at or surpassing pre-pandemic. Port bus is also fairly close. Our rail modes are a little bit further behind.
I mean, it says a lot that the bus is caught up.
Yep. No, I mean, we one of the things that we saw in particular during COVID was that our bus ridership didn't drop as much as many of our peer agencies, speaking to the importance of the bus for this region. And so I think that ties into what we're seeing now ridership wise.
Do you mind in the future just adding a quick supplemental ridership slide that goes back further, just so we can sort of keep track of where we started? It's like a second slide that's just got a longer timeline. Thanks.
And then vacancy rate, again, continued to make some pretty good strides. Our operator vacancy rate did bump up a little bit. That's fairly typical for us in the summer months where we see a little bit of a bump up. And so we're continuing to focus on increasing hiring, increasing training, and bringing more people in the door. But overall, our vacancy rate continues to go down. It is a focus for the agency to ensure that we have enough folks to deliver the service.
So I have a question there. In terms of your vacancy rate, congratulations that it's so low. But how does that correlate with on-time performance? Because your on-time performance especially for a core bus, is still at less than 75%. So your vacancies are full. So what is the concern that causes your on-time performance to still be only at 75%? Does it have something to do with absenteeism?
So the cut service is really where you see the impact of the vacancy rate more than anything else. And as I noted, our cut service in July was a multi-year low. So that's where vacancy plays in, like being able to deliver the service. On-time performance is more tied into what our schedules look like, what traffic look like, what the impacts there are. I will note like the Key Bridge traffic changes impact us, right? Like traffic has changed around the region. We're still kind of figuring out what that looks like. School started again, and that always impacts as well. And so our team is looking constantly at the data, looking at how we can adjust our schedules to better align with current traffic patterns, and that is an ongoing focus of ours.
Holly, one quick question. I keep going back to the Mark one-time performance. Explain that to me again, the 10% drop plus there.
It's primarily Amtrak. So we don't own any of the tracks that we operate on. Amtrak is our Penn line, and CSX is the Camden to Brunswick lines. Amtrak launched more service this year, and they do the dispatching. They prioritize their service over ours sometimes, and so our service ends up holding for theirs. So we're working with them. We have some contractual mechanisms that we can use and we are using to try and get that back up. Heat related to some, CSX in particular has had a lot of heat restrictions this summer, but you know, the main driver here is the delays due to Amtrak regional trains.
Thank you. Other questions? Great, thanks, Holly, very much for all that. Are you, I know your slide a minute ago was MTA budget. Are we gonna have to go MDOT go first and come back to your budget? Is that the plan?
Deputy Secretary Biddle's gonna go.
So, let me, welcome Deputy Secretary Biddle, there you are, sorry. Who is here to talk about, overall MDOT, budget and the CTP, and she'll probably tell you the secretary has a cabinet meeting that is required under contract to attend, so. But Samantha, I'm gonna say a couple things first, I don't wanna make you stand while I do that, so.
I'm already standing. So
Well, I don't wanna
I'll
make you
just
continue to
slowly
stand.
walk.
That's fine too.
All right.
I just want to, before we got a lot of stuff on this agenda, important stuff, nothing's more important than budget and CTP. I just want to make a couple of comments and sort of bring everybody up to date. And I sort of divide them into two categories. One is sort of process and the other is, I guess, what I call content. Regarding the process in terms of where we are and where the commission is and how we fit in. I think that people have said to me that we've gotten unprecedented information. You know, the paradigm is different, right? In terms of MDOT and MTA providing information. And I think we've gotten unprecedented information in advance, including a meeting a week or so ago with the chair and vice chair because of the interim, we were between meetings, of course. So appreciated the reach out. I think though, I just want to say sort of for the record, you know, my view is that we're not yet really in strict compliance with what the statute provides, or frankly, the intent of what the statute provides. The statute requires that we are involved in this process before the draft CTP, not after the draft CTP. That is unprecedented and unusual and is going to take some adjustment. And I'm very sympathetic to that. But, you know, not only is it a question of what the statute provides, but it's also, I think it would allow the commission to be frankly more useful and productive and helpful if we also had that. It wasn't, that requirement isn't there arbitrarily. It's there because I think someone thought, legislators thought, governor thought that it would help the process to have more involvement early on. So I think this was a very big step this year. I really appreciate MDOT and MTA doing it, but I do think that we need to tune it up in the next cycle. And I've discussed this with the secretary and deputy secretary, and I think they're appreciative. But we and MDOT and MTA are allies. This is not about adversity in any way. And you know, we are now formally, it may not be evident, but we are formally the first stop on the CTP tour. I know that they are changing the CTP process probably for next year. But you know, there's a tour, all the local jurisdictions, we're now first. I'm not saying we're first because we're most important, maybe it was just easier and the meeting is today. No, it's okay. But if you look at the CTP schedule, it's all of the jurisdictions and us. So I think I appreciate that sort of inclusion, but you know, for the record, if you will, it does say review and approve. As part of the review and comment, sorry, on the administration's annual budget, as part of the development of the draft and final. So I'm not a transportation expert, but I'm a lawyer, and to me, as part of the development, draft and final means that we're supposed to be involved before the draft, not at the draft stage. Like I said, I think we have some work to do to get there for a variety of reasons. Also, while we know that there are plenty of advocates in the governor's office and at MDOT for transit and MTA, as I said, we're really allies. We do have an independent statutory duty. I'll remind everybody, the statute says that we're to provide input and engage in advocacy for the Baltimore region public transit systems maintained by the administration. And it also says that the commission shall endeavor to ensure that the administration's plans, budgets, decisions, policies, goals, priorities, operations, and services, God bless the drafters, address the public transit needs of residents and businesses in the Baltimore region. So this is not like we just want to do it. We're not some self-styled advocacy. We're here because the legislature and the governor in enacting this law told us that's what we're supposed to do. I've become very acutely aware of how critical it is for us to play that role. The system and its riders need advocates, and they need advocates, not only the excellent advocacy community, who are some of who are represented here today, many of whom we know about, who've been on the scene for a long time, but advocates with some sort of official sanction. And I think we all recognize this is the first time that the state has seen fit to put a body like this together. And I would say, if you look at the CTP, if you look at history, if you look at the overall situation, the lack of something like this is one of the reasons why the system has, in my view, been so disadvantaged over time, and it's critically important. I would refer the commission to the exchange of letters that we had after the last meeting. I think it was after the last, maybe it was 2 meetings ago, where Joe McAndrew came and made a presentation, good presentation. We sent him a letter with some follow-ups. He then responded. Again, I think there's a lot, first of all, it's good precedent to have that back and forth. And second, you know, there's good material in there. He answered questions that we wanted to have answered, I think, in a very direct way, which is appropriate. And it includes issues that we're gonna have to peel the onion on, like WMATA and treatment of WMATA versus how MTA is treated in the system. It includes lots of questions that the local governments had questions about. We asked for updated information about the waterfall, meaning what money came in from last session, how it's being spent. I don't think that information is readily available elsewhere. It's being made available because we're asking for it, and again, the department is responding directly to that. You know, I appreciate where we are, appreciate the role of the commission, I appreciate the cooperation. I do think that, you know, it's a good sort of status check. So that's all process. Just for a minute now on the substance. The CTP is not good. It's not good for the state in general. It's not good for any of the modes, and you'll hear about this in a moment. It's definitely not good for MTA and transit. And in my view, it will really damage the existing system, and it will handicap us in terms of expansion and enhancements. I'll just say, you know, you can't cut state of good repair. It's cut state of good repair. You can't defer and cut, and you'll hear this, and perhaps you've seen it depending on how much time you've spent pouring through it. $670 million in the course of the CTP from MTA projects, some of which are state of good repair, some of which are $670 million, right, is being cut over the next 6 years from the CTP. You cannot do that and fulfill our obligations to our riders and to our region, our potential riders, people we want to attract to the system. We'll come back probably a couple of times to this question of WMATA. I love WMATA, I love riding WMATA. I want WMATA to have all the money that it needs to do the things it needs to do to serve its people, but it is a fundamentally different structure than MTA for all the reasons that we know. You know, maybe this authority study that we're doing will contribute to that. Maybe it will change, maybe it won't. But I think that this commission is obligated to explore and understand better. And we've started to do this in the exchange with Joe McAndrew. We've started to talk about it here. You know, what these two structures are different, and how does it affect the way these two critical systems are treated. So really appreciate Deputy Secretary's presence here. We appreciate being first on the CTP tour. You will have every opportunity here today to ask whatever questions you want of both the Secretary, Deputy Secretary, and the MTA, because Holly will give a more focused presentation about MTA. So we look forward to working on this together. The Baltimore region needs us and needs better transit. And, you know, there's so much to be done. This is a good start, but we've got to all pitch in and work together. And I frankly found the CTP as it was issued to be disappointing and jarring. I want to be clear, this is not MDOT's fault. This is not a blame thing. This is not about you know, people who don't care about transit. Resources are scarce, which is a whole nother discussion about how the system's going to get resources. The train commission still exists in a different form. I know there's gonna be discussion about resources, which at the end of the day, in my view, is really what needs to happen here. But our job in the statute, and I think the reason we all asked or were asked to be appointed here is because of our passion and interest in Baltimore Regional Transit. And I'm gonna stick up for it unapologetically because it needs to be stuck up for. And I hope everybody feels the same way. So with that, Samantha, I'm happy to have you talk about the overall CTP, and then we'll have Holly, and then the commission will, I'm sure, have all sorts of good questions.
Thank you, John. No, thank you everyone for having me here today. I've not had the opportunity to appear before this board before, so take a moment of personal privilege just to give you a little bit of my background, because it does tie into the CTP, why it's so important for all of you, but why it's really very important to me. I've been working in the transportation space, living in the Baltimore region for almost 20 years. This past summer, Baltimore became the place where I've officially lived the longest in my life. I think that means something. It has said something about the choices I've made for myself and my family, and about the future that I see for us, and really wanting to make everything as better as we can. And in addition to working in the transportation space, this is my 11th year doing CTP tours. Don and I had the chance to chat previously. I still think he has me by a few years in terms of the pleasure to work on CTP tours. I started off in the department as a regional planner and have been working on the capital program ever since then. I started working at the Secretary's office about 5 years ago. So I just want you to know that I do have a lot of history with this document, with this process, and I want to thank the chair for his comments, because I think a lot of what this body has been working on just in the months that it's been convening have done a lot to show that there can be change, that there can be an openness to a conversation. And I want you to know that you have that commitment from the secretary, you have that commitment from me. And so while this is not ideally the first plan that I would like to be presenting to this body, I think that it is a starting point for a conversation. So with that, I'll get into more of the formal remarks, but I did just want to take a moment to give you a little bit of my background and just let you know that I do really look forward to hearing from you, hearing your comments, and better understanding what we can do with this program. This is a draft. And so this is officially the point in time where we start to receive those comments as we work towards the final. So with that, on to more of the prepared show. So good morning, Samantha Biddle, Deputy Secretary, Maryland Department of Transportation. So today's meeting serves as the department's first fall tour meeting, and we really do appreciate the opportunity to provide that overview of our draft 6-year consolidated transportation program, more commonly known as the CTP, which covers fiscal years 2025 to 2030. Again, for those of us who have been in this business for a while, I think some of us remember when 2030 was a forecasting year for traffic models, so that says maybe more about me than about the program, but this year, I think it really hit me seeing 2030 there. So this morning, I want to provide a high-level overview of the draft CTP and on transit more broadly in the Baltimore region. Obviously, Holly will cover that in greater detail. Before diving in further, I do again want to thank this board for engaging with us and continued development of this document and our program, and really do appreciate the advocacy of this community for transit service in the greater Baltimore region. So getting into the draft CTP at a high level, just like how all Marylanders are making tough decisions to live within their means, that is the position that those of us at MDOT had to be in as well as we develop this draft program. So the department continues to face significant budgetary challenges, and this is due to slow economic growth, historic levels of inflation, and the rising cost of labor materials, things that are not uncommon to those of you in the private industry as well as other local government. Last year's CTP required $3.3 billion in reductions between the operating and capital budgets. Thanks to the governor's one-time funding from the general fund last year and additional revenues passed by the General Assembly, MDOT was able to focus on 3 major areas: retaining key operations, including those core services that Holly's team provides, maintaining commitments to local governments to restore highway user revenue and local operating transit grants, otherwise known as lots, and to fund many of our previous commitments, including things like funding commitments for the Frederick Douglass Tunnel. However, as we are closing out fiscal year 2024 on the books, revenue forecasts for several important funding sources were revised downward. Most importantly for us, this included revenue declines in the motor fuel tax, titling tax, transit fares, and vehicle registrations. Projections in the operating budget have also increased. It costs more to deliver the service that we put out there on the street every day. With these factors in mind, our draft CTP for the next 6 years prioritizes those frontline operations and local support activities that we know our customers and local partners depend on. However, those commitments impact how much Maryland can leverage federal funding, and that is really the backbone of our capital program. Getting into the details, the draft CTP is balanced and totals 18.9 billion. Because of fiscal constraints, we did have to make tough decisions to live within our means while still releasing this balanced budget, and this resulted in 1.3 billion in reductions compared to the final 24 through 29 CTP. Even with these reductions, MDOT's committed to strategically using available resources to advance the state goals as much as we can. We have limited state dollars, but we fully intend to stretch them as far as we possibly can. So this does include protecting the HUR, protecting the lots. We're advancing electric vehicle charging, active transportation, and new federally funded resiliency and carbon reduction projects across the state. Funding for the Howard Street Tunnel to support the growth of the port and with the creation of thousands of family-sustaining careers. This also includes funding the Frederick Douglass Tunnel project, supporting project development process for the Baltimore Red Line, and implementing a new pedestrian safety action plan. Specifically within MTA's budget, we are committing 525 million in capital investments for things like the Baltimore Red Line, the Purple Line, and for matching funds for federal grant awards. We know that there's a need to further enhance transit through the east-west corridor in the Baltimore region, and so we're committed to moving the Red Line forward. As I know this body is aware, the CTP also reflects the agency's challenge to fund state of good repair needs at levels outlined in the Transit Safety and Investment Act during fiscal years 25 and 26, and impacts our ability to fund zero emission bus transition. Looking ahead, MDOT is committed to following the data and making strategic investments that support Maryland families in a fiscally responsible manner. I'll close it out in a few, but I'll turn it over to Holly to dive into her program a little bit further. Thank you.
Samantha, before you go, just if you don't mind, and people may have questions that are more general, so we just take a minute. I'll just start. So you just mentioned it briefly. I mean, I think it'd be worth maybe just explaining to everybody briefly what the TSIA, Transit Safety Investment Act is.
Yeah.
And what it's intended to do, and then sort of explain, as you just alluded to, what the potential consequences are of the proposed CTP regarding TSIA.
Sure. So Transit Safety Investment Act, Holly, help me out on the year it was passed,
18 or 19, there was a couple of versions of it.
If you could correct the someone look it up and correct the record, that'd be helpful. I apologize for not having the Legislative History Committee memory, but in terms of the funding amounts, so this act was brought forward in order to provide funding levels for state of good repair investments at the MTA. And so we've been working over what that has helped Holly's team to do is to address the backlog of state of good repair needs. I was documenting the capital needs inventory. We'll be working on a new one of those to be released within, I believe, the next 12-month period. And I think, you know, as Holly may have reported to this group before, we've made significant progress with being able to address some of those needs. But as the state of good repair needs, you know, are addressed, other ones come online. And so the funding levels that are in the TSIA for 25 and 26 is to fund state of repair at MTA at least $450 million. And so in 25, we are funding at just over $336 million. In 26, we are at $376 million. So the you know, the shortfall in 25 is about $113 million, and the shortfall in 26 is just over $73 million. I will say that looking over the program period, we are funding in excess of the requirements. So I think that you can see the commitment there is not that we drop off and stay dropped off. Where we had the opportunity to bump that funding back up, we are, and in some years we are, you know, overfunding state of good repair on the TSIA levels by as much as $250 million. That doesn't mean that we're going to get to the entire backlog, but I have to commend Holly and her team, especially in the asset management practice that she's developed and spearheaded over the past few years. The ability to really rank and understand how to use dollars, even when they're resource constrained, to get to those state of good repair needs. And so that really gets to taking care of our existing system. And that's something that, you know, it can be hard to find an advocacy body for. So I do want to thank this body for your advocacy for those types of investments, because quite frankly, they aren't always the sexy ones. I love to see the excitement around the Red Line. It's a project that I worked on 15 years ago, and I am thrilled to see back. But in order to move the Red Line forward, we can't not address, the system that we have today. And so that is all part of that major balancing act that is extremely challenging right now. But we are going to be using the state of good repair dollars that we do have available to their highest and best use, and that's Holly's team. Using that data-driven approach to see, where we can make the most strategic investments to maintain our system. But the reality is that we do not meet the statutory mandated levels in those years, and so we will have to seek budget reconciliation language this legislative session if we are unable to make any adjustments.
Please.
I have a question on that you kind of started going exactly where my question was. So there's a gap. I'm not an attorney. So if you can explain in non-attorney terms, right? Obviously, it's a legal requirement. There's a gap that's not being filled. So what is either the process to justify that, and or is the law being in place not mean that you have to meet it and make cuts in other areas? Kind of walk me through.
Right,
that
so
means.
this is a draft plan, and this is where we are right now to snapshot in time. Between now and the final plan that gets submitted along with our operating budget to the legislature in January, if, the numbers look, similar, that if we have any red basically for those years, we will have to also seek, a budget reconciliation package that would move through the legislature. And ultimately, we would have to, work with those in Annapolis to try to understand, is this the right reduction, or to your point, does there need to be a reduction in other areas? And I know that I don't want to discredit this group's advocacy for, Baltimore Transit, but one of the great parts and challenging parts of MDOT is balancing the resources across all of the modes. So while, there were significant reductions at the MTA, we did also see reductions in excess of $1 billion on our highway system. And, another important part of state of good repair is also, the safety and maintenance, of our state roads. So it's difficult to say, how do you shift the pieces of a pie that is inherently too small right now to meet those needs? But, there is a process that will have to play out in the legislature if we're unable to make any further adjustments between now and the submission of the final CTP.
Simone?
Good morning, how are you?
Great.
How are you?
Great to see you. Good.
So mine is two-pronged, and maybe you are or are not prepared to talk about it today, but I'm gonna ask anyway. So one, do you have any idea about flows one way or the other as we move forward with HUR dollars? Anything we should expect anymore? And then two, I think you referred to a 1.3 billion reduction, was it?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what specific buckets we should be prepared to see that in? I'm just curious.
Yes, so I'll go in reverse order. So in terms of the deferrals, we do have a list of projects that, saw reduced funding for all of our modes. And so we can share that with you so you can see kind of the buckets and where those are being reduced. Some are state of good repair and some are not. So, that information, I think we can provide a good summary to this group rather than asking you to cull through hundreds and hundreds of pages for it. So yes, we can provide you that so you can kind of see where those reductions were made. It really is across the board. I wish I could give you say that it was a list of a dozen things, but the reality is it's dozens, if not hundreds of individual projects where we're having to make those adjustments. The good news, because there is some good news, especially for those of you who do have local transportation capital investments to also manage, is that there were no reductions made to the highway user revenue funding levels. So as you may recall, last session, we looked at holding those down at that 15.6% level steady through the program period. Our financial plan right now acknowledges and bumps up to the higher percentages of 18 and 20% that is in statute. So our plan is completely consistent, with that law.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I have a follow-up question. In following MDOT's response to our August 27th meeting, how does the department interpret its funding obligations for WMATA compared to MTA, given that the difference in the compact agreement and the state legislation are the contributions from the Transportation Trust Fund to the MTA considered non-discretionary?
So I think that comes back to where we have agreement and shared goals and where we see differences. I think the agreement that we have is that both systems are very important to the state. Both systems are very important to the ridership basis that they serve. And I did take the opportunity to look back at some of the materials from, you know, the earlier meeting in July that the Assistant Secretary presented on. And I understand, you know, where this question is coming from. I understand where the word WMATA appears in that waterfall, you know, graphic compared to where the MTA, and for that matter, all of the modes are positioned. And so the funding agreement with WMATA is in fact very unique, not just to Maryland, but nationally in terms of how we have multiple jurisdictions funding it through the compact. And so right now, that is how we have viewed that funding agreement, and we are fulfilling those requirements. There is also the funding, the dedicated funding that comes in from the general fund that plays a part in that. And so we do have a commitment to fund both systems as best we can. And so we are continuing to fund both systems as best we can. And the other point that I would make is the constraint that we're seeing right now, primarily with MTA, is largely on the capital side, and we are doing everything to fund MTA on the operating side, and made the decision that the service that we're providing on the street is very important, and that we do not want to cut any service in order to, you know, balance the budget in that way. So I hear you, and I'm open to, you know, an ongoing discussion on how this plays out, because I know that parity between the regions, you know, when you look at WMATA is a challenge, and then I know there's also the Purple Line that also is something that is of interest and has great impact on our budget. But it really comes down to the availability of the state dollars and just not having enough of them to meet all of the needs that we want to.
So I would just challenge the MDOT to look at weigh in the compact and legislative requirements and priorities. I mean, how do you decide these legislative priorities and requirements we're not going to fund, but we're going to fund the compact? It helps the Baltimore region to understand, you know, a legislative mandate is a legislative mandate, especially when it comes to state of good repair.
I hear you.
If I could piggyback on that and then we could move on.
Sure.
So I think it's important from a comprehensive perspective that there is a balanced approach when looking at both regions and ensuring economic mobility for populations on both ends of the spectrum. So I would strongly recommend that we try to do a more robust job at that in the future, and perhaps examine some of the approaches that we are taking today to ensure that balance going forward.
I hear you, and I think it's also important to kind of look at some of the history on, you know, where the funding is, and then some of the WMATA funding, you know, where there were percentage increases. If you look at sort of a 3-year period, funding for WMATA increased by a total of 14%, and during that same time period, funding for MTA increased by about 30%. And so we had a 1-year uptick for WMATA. It was really a catch-up year for a lot of other things. But I don't, you know, as much as I think that your point, Simone, is very important, and looking at how we are dispersing resources equitably is something that I take very seriously. I think that I don't want to get lost too much in the numbers. I know the numbers are very important, but
That's all we have.
I know all we have are the numbers, but the most overarching message that I can provide is just the resources are not there to meet all of the needs that we want to meet right now. And I hope that you understand that we're doing our absolute best to find a balance. And, you know, this is the balance that we have brought forward for this plan. And we will continue in this dialogue and in the dialogue with the other 24 jurisdictions as we continue along this tour to you know, better understand kind of if there are adjustments that need to be made.
Could the state theoretically renegotiate the compact and instead fulfilled its obligations under the Transit Safety and Investment Act. In other words, why does one come before the other? Why are we prioritizing in that way? Why can't we prioritize differently? Why can't we make them more balanced?
Theoretically, yes. I do not have the history with the WMATA compact that my boss does. And so, but I think the piece there that makes it increasingly complicated is how the other funding jurisdictions, including the federal government, play into it. And ultimately, looking at the compact also involves a congressional piece. Not to say that, to your point, theoretically, it could not be reopened and looked at, but that's just the status of where it
I
is.
just want to say, these people, you know, listening, including our friends in Montgomery and, you know, other counties in the state, I have no interest in depriving WMATA of resources it needs. I read the stories, I've read this, there was a big post that, if you haven't seen it, I think we may have sent it around. It's a big post story this week about the funding crisis, there's a task force, there's a fiscal cliff, all of those things. I'm sure that's true. Like, I don't, this is not, I'm a transit advocate. I want WMATA to be healthy. I just have a hard time continuing to reconcile the idea that it seems like we are choosing and favoring WMATA over MTA. And somehow we've got to find a way, frankly, to fund both. But if we can't fund both, then we should at least fund both more equitably with each other. And I think that's what you're hearing here. So we're going to keep looking at this question. And we're going to continue to dig into the question of the WMATA's funding structure, very different from MTA's, lots of different sources and all of that. And I do recognize that it's a different dynamic, but the outcome is the same, which is that WMATA is not getting cut. MTA is. And I think we have an obligation to sort of raise our hands and say, hang on a second. So that's what you're hearing here, and I think we have to continue that conversation.
And I would have been surprised if I had not heard that, and I do want to say that I do appreciate the dialogue, I do appreciate the points, and just looking at it from all the different angles, so I don't take it as piling on. We're here to hear the feedback, and I do want to say that I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay, other questions for Samantha before we move on to MTA specific? Oh, sorry.
One more question from interest. After the collapse of the bridge, of course, it added like $1.7 billion in your budget. I'm just curious, maybe where does the money come from, or does it get mostly from federal funds, or do we have to fund it at a state?
No,
And then what's the impact
that's a
for
great
that
question.
on the
So-
savings that we need to make across the board here for the agencies?
Right. And so the unique part of the Key Bridge, in addition to all the parts of that disaster that were unique, is that it falls within the Maryland Transportation Authority. And so their budget and their finances are independent of the Transportation Trust Fund. So even without the good news that there is federal funding that will fund at least 90% of those costs, it is outside of the Transportation Trust Fund. So the needs on the Key Bridge are not impacting the rest of our budgetary picture for the other modes that are funded by the TTF. We're working very closely with our partners in the federal government and in Congress in order to see even 100% funding for that bridge replacement. And so we're very optimistic on that front and hope that we'll be able to secure 100% federal funding for it. But right now we're tracking about 90%. So no, that's a great question. I'm glad to have it on the record because I think that there's a lot of, if you start looking at, you know, numbers that are in the $1.5 billion range in terms of reductions in needs, one could think that the Key Bridge was a driving factor here. Unfortunately, there are even more factors at play in the revenue shortfall.
So let me just ask a question, since you did say that, and we are looking at other options for MTA as a part of this commission as well. You talked about MDTA being outside of the Transportation Trust Fund. There still has to be a match from the state, even if federal government comes up with the majority of the funding. Where does that match come from? I'm asking because we're also looking at other options for MTA in terms of authority and not authority and the whole nine. So in the structure of the MDTA is one that we've tossed around. Where is that match coming from for the bridge outside of the Transportation Trust Fund within the MDOT umbrella?
it comes from MDTA's budget. And so
MDTA's budget, that is their budget
that is
comes from.
outside of the TTF, that comes from toll revenues.
Yeah, it's mostly.
So the MDTA published its financial updates. I believe the last one that was presented to their board was in July. And at that point in time, the financial plan that they published assumed the 10% cost share would be factored into it. So right now, as they're doing their financial planning, they are doing their financial planning and are balancing their budget to assume that they will need to come up with that 10% match over the course of when that bridge is being reconstructed. So that has all been contained within the MDTA budget and has not impacted anything on the TTF side.
Yes, like,
Can we, while you're still up here, before we dig in to MTA.
For record, I was going to come back up. I wasn't trying to run away without answering questions.
I was not sure, but I have kind of a big picture question, so, and you've alluded to it several times, and I have a level of personal and professional empathy of, you have a lot of pots that you're trying to figure out and how you balance those moments. So my question is, when you look at cuts that have to happen across different modes and different elements of MDOT, one of the things that we hear in this meeting, I feel like every meeting, and I feel like every time there's an article in the paper with people complaining about light rail service in particular, we keep coming back to the same thing, which is there's not enough rail cars based on deferred maintenance that, happened for reasons prior to today. But it feels like those ideas around state of good repair, maintenance, and even that capital investment, I just want to put forward that I challenge the idea that a cut in transit and the kind of ripple impact it has from a procurement standpoint, from an equipment standpoint, from a lag time of ordering and getting these custom vehicles has a greater impact than perhaps it does across other modes and other agencies. So one of, I think, the conceptual questions I have as you look at this budget as a whole, is how do you prioritize the modes? Because there's this fundamental question, and certainly, addressing climate resiliency is something that is a priority for the administration. We know that single occupancy vehicles are one of the biggest contributors. So the viability of transit to be an alternative that is embraced, that is consistent, that is on time, that is, all the things we all want it to be, and we saw the graphs today. That investment, we're already behind. There's a lag in the way that transit kind of works to get on the ground. And then at the end of it, we are every day changing, altering, or disappointing, customers that won't come back and try again, right? So it's all real time. And from what you've already said, I know you understand all of that. But I really want to challenge from our standpoint as transit advocates that dollar for dollar, I think there's a greater impact on the viability of transit to be competitive, to have that ultimate impact across the region. So that's my position. I'm curious, project prioritization, is there really an idea that we want to make sure that we're investing in certain modes? Is that part of the prioritization process? I'm kind of curious about that.
Right. I mean, I'll be honest that I didn't necessarily think that we would be in the position where we would have to be prioritizing state of good repair needs between modes. That is not a position that I want to be in.
Not a good place to be.
That Holly wants to be in. I think the place where, and some of you may be aware of this, we are looking at a broader prioritization conversation for our capital program that is targeted more at the expansion side of things, because I think that that has been something that over the years has struggled to. There's been different efforts to bring some transparency and data-driven competitiveness to that, but I think that there's a way to do better. Unfortunately, we're not able to even have that conversation about prioritization on the expansion side because of how very, constrained our system is. So, ideally, when we're talking about prioritization, how prioritization works between state of good repair between modes, it's perhaps unrealistic given, the program sitting in front of me, but I don't want to have to prioritize the state of good repair need, that Holly's facing versus something that is being faced, on the highway side of things. We did look at where where we had the ability to, you know, make sure that we were spending those funds. So that is something that we were looking at. The teams at all of the modes really looked very closely in a very fine-grained detail at, you know, where do we have projects that are already going? I think that's something that can be lost sometimes when you're looking at a 6-year program and thinking about projects that have cash flows that go across fiscal years. So we needed to be really beholden to projects that are underway and making sure that we are able to continue to fund those projects that are underway. Because to your point about, you know, the increasing cost of deferred maintenance, think about the increasing cost of having to demobilize an active project and then bring it back later. And so that in looking at what things got, you know, prioritized for this funding, it really was prioritizing keeping the active work going. And you know, we are just in that constrained of a position where that needed to be kind of that bar. And then on top of that bar comes down to really the most critical needs across the system. And that's where we are fortunate to have a robust asset management program across our modes where we're able to say, you know, this is the highest level of criticality and this is where we're going to, you know, use the limited funds that we have available.
Thanks. Okay, well, I think we'll transition. You may be recalled if the
Happy to
question
come back
arises,
up.
but thank you. We know that you're trying to help.
I know you are as well,
Right.
all of you,
So-
really. So, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Fiddle. So I have a presentation I'm gonna run through. I think Deputy Secretary has me beat by a few years on CTP, but I remember working on like an 09 CTP, so yes, being a 25 or 30 does seem a little surreal. So starting out, I just wanna talk about some of the highlights of the budget. You know, I'm gonna repeat some of the things that I think the Deputy Secretary mentioned, but you know, we are maintaining all of our existing MTA operating service levels, which I think is really important. Service on the ground is out there and we're continuing to provide it. We're working through our daily struggles, but we're out there, you know, working every day to make sure we're providing service for our riders. And we'll talk about the operating budget a little bit at the end, but we have seen some increases to that, again, related to service. The budget does retain our commitment to project development for the Red Line. So the Red Line is continuing to move forward. It saw a funding increase of over $50 million. We do have over $150 million available for the project, which allows us to request entry into the FTA program, which is continuing to move forward with project development on that.
And that's, I don't mean to keep, I don't want to keep interrupting you, but just to clarify. So that's planning money, right? If you looked in the, whichever of the hundreds of pages is the relevant page in CTP, you would see planning money in each of those years. Obviously, no construction money yet, hasn't been awarded, right? That's what we're talking about.
Yep, planning money, and which is still very important. You know, once we get FTA, when you start requesting entry into the capital investment grant program, they want to see that commitment, and this gives us that commitment to have those conversations with FTA. We are fully funding the Purple Line and working towards completion in 2027 for that project. Construction is more than 68% complete. We now have 4 of the light rail vehicles arriving down there and are going to be starting testing later this fall, which is huge for the state. We're continuing to work with Amtrak to invest in the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, which again is huge for safety, reliability improvements. We saw the on-time performance of our MARC service. So again, a lot of that is related to capacity constraints on the railroad. A new tunnel, the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, will improve those capacity constraints. A lot of the delays on the Penn Line are associated with the BMP tunnel. So this replacement tunnel is critically important. It is an Amtrak-led project. They have awarded their contracts for it. We're working closely with them. And obviously one of the things I'm most excited about is finally in 2030, having an ADA accessible West Baltimore MARC station. It's been desperately needed for a long time. And so that will be possible because of this project. We're continuing to focus on our replacement of the Metro vehicles and train control system. You heard me talk about that earlier, which is a major state-of-the-art repair investment for the system. And for the light rail vehicle, we did win the rail vehicle replacement grant back in February. And so the funding for that and the matching funding have been added to the program. That project did move from D&E into our construction program. So continuing to focus on replacing those vehicles so that we have continued to provide service. So just a chart here showing kind of again, over the 6-year total, the budget differences. You can see the FY 24 to 29, what was in the final CTP, what was in the draft. get a lot of questions, what were those changes? And so we've kind of outlined those here. Again, highlighting the red line did see an increase of 52.6 million. The Frederick Douglass Tunnel, including some of the associated projects, was increased by 76 million. Our lots program saw an increase of 18.4, and then a adjustment on the state of good repair and enhancement funds. You see in the deferral list, 670 million of reductions. Again, that's partially offset by the fact that we added funding for the light rail vehicles. So again, the budget is kind of constantly moving as we add, we remove, and so that's what this resulted here. So overall, we are up $373 million over the 6-year period.
Oh, that's a good, quick question. Just for this group, and you probably do not have this at your fingertips now, it would be good to see the breakouts for the locally operated transit systems and state of good repair just for the Baltimore region. Because that's the given the legislative purview of what the commission is supposed to focus on.
So I have in just a minute, the
Okay.
next slide goes into capital budget by mode. So you can
Okay.
basically see kind of where we are by mode. The way that we budget in the capital budget for the lots, the CTP doesn't break it out by county. That happens on a year by year basis. So
But
we
you have the year by year,
No, we can give you FY 25. I can't give you beyond that. So
that'd be helpful for this group.
have it, so we're happy to provide that. Yeah, so again, by mode, you know, some of the changes here, and again, it's additions, it's subtractions, a lot of things that kind of moving parts in the capital budget. Core bus, one of the big differences here is the deferral of our transition to zero emission buses. So the reduction that you see here is primarily associated with the replacement of our Eastern bus facility, as well as the electrification costs of electrifying our different bus divisions. So that's the primary change that you're seeing there. Again, I mentioned previously on the light rail side, we did add the matching fund and the rail vehicle replacement grant for the light rail vehicles, which is fantastic. And so that is really what's driving the increase on light rail. Metro, we saw some reductions there, mostly related to station work, platforms, lighting, escalators, things like that are driving that. On the MARC side, some increases again associated mostly with the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, mobility vehicle increases. We're continuing to make sure that we have enough vehicles to provide that critical service. The lots I mentioned previously, New Starts did see a rather large increase, and then the rest is kind of our agency-wide projects.
Does that light rail include the purple line, or is that just Baltimore?
Nope, New Starts is where the purple line is included. They're down below.
I think, you know, Mike's questions, again, I could say, I could repeat what I said earlier and substitute the words purple line for WMATA, right? In the sense that the purple line is great, it needs to be there, it needs to succeed, I wish it hadn't cost so much, I'm sure you agree. But, you know, it's not here. And the difference between them, of course, is that WMATA is in a different budget class, you know, etc. This is obviously within MTA's budget. And so it's important for us to be able to disaggregate the purple line in respect to, you know, construction costs, hard costs, state of goodwill. I don't know if state of good repair applies yet, but you know, all those sorts of things. So that's why we're asking these questions. I'm sure you know, but I'm also saying for everybody else's benefit, because I think that, you know, the biggest thing in the MTA budget that could distract from the mission of this commission, again, not because we don't like the purple line, but our analytical mission is trying to understand how the purple line affects the numbers. So you know, as you're doing this and as we go forward, whatever you can do to preemptively identify for us, you know, what is purple line related would just be helpful for us, because otherwise we're just gonna have to keep sort of going through that.
Yeah, I mean, so again, I'll refer you to slide 13. We
Yep,
do
I got
have an outline of what the purple line
Yep, I got you.
in the program. I wanna, you know, capital budget performance, Deputy Secretary mentioned, and I have mentioned at previous commission meetings, our focus on increasing the amount of spending that we are able to do, increasing our capacity to spend. And I wanna celebrate the team has done some fantastic work over the past few years that have resulted in some major improvements in FY 24. You know, we saw a 20% increase in our spending levels over FY 23. Our projected year-end expenditure is over 570 million, which is 94% of what our budget was. Our goal is over 90%, so that is fantastic. On the MTA side, which is kind of our state of good repair, our enhancement program, so excluding purple line in the lots, we spent about 340 million in FY '24, which was 80% of that allocation. So we're not quite there yet. We have a lot of work and are continuing to chip away at that. I've mentioned some of our efforts in previous meetings, but that's what we're working towards. We did spend about 40 million over previous year's average expenditures, which you can see in the table on the right-hand side. So again, a kind of fairly steady increase in expenditures over the past few years. We're continuing to work towards that. Our draft CTP does have our increase about 15 million over where we are in FY '24.
Again, I feel like I'm doing color commentary or play-by-play, but I'm just, so if you don't, I'm sorry. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands. This question, I've raised this a couple times with Holly and with MTA because, you talk to people who look at numbers, don't really investigate the context. You're not spending all of your money, why should we give you more, right? Everybody's familiar with that. We've all experienced it or said it at one time or another. So I've asked that question because I think I want to make sure that we understand it. And I'm convinced that MTA is doing the best they can under the circumstances. And the circumstances are, procurement issues, staffing issues, and we can talk about this at another time, but I just want to say briefly, I wanted the answer to that because I wanted to be able to push back against what I consider to be a fairly sort of superficial data point that people will sometimes hit you with, which is, well, what percentage of the money we gave you before did you spend, and so this is a good slide, and I just want to plant the seed with the commission that we should keep looking at this. Some of the things that the work groups are doing, especially the project delivery work group, are intended to see if there are barriers that we can address that could help get this number up higher. Obviously, it's good if it goes up because it means we're actually spending money on stuff. But that's part of the context for this, because I don't think it's fair. I mean, it could have been fair. It's a good question to ask, but I don't think MTA deserves really criticism for not spending 100% of the money, because there are these very practical issues, and it's not realistic to expect that number to be all the money. Yeah, feel free if that's not perfectly accurate, feel free to.
Yeah, I mean, we need to show that we're in good investment. And I think, we're showing that we are getting there. We're not there yet. I'm not happy with this. I'm pleased with the progress, but we're not yet where we'd like to be. And so that's the continued capacity improvements that we're working towards.
Right, but we've asked MTA to work with us and the work groups to help identify what the barriers are to getting that number up. You never reach 100%, probably won't reach 100%, probably shouldn't reach 100% in some respects, but it should be higher than it is. And the question is, what can this commission do as an advocate for MTA to put MTA in a position to spend more money? More money you spend, the more stuff you get, it's a good thing, and the more money you spend, the more chance there is to get more money, and so on and so on. So it's an upward spiral, and we want to get MTA on that upward spiral as quickly as possible.
Can I ask one more question? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say if I can add / clarify, particularly because again, more people kind of start paying attention when we're talking about budget. My understanding, and you've alluded to, we talk about this in multiple meetings, is that the majority of the constraint in spending the budget is external, either in the structural kind of process of procurement, but then combine that with both inflation and supply chain issues. Is that, I know that's very high level, but those are kind of the major components that are constraining it.
Yeah, I mean, those have been some major constraints for us. I mean, there are some internal ones too, like we have work to do internally to make sure we have the right number of people in procurement, the right expertise in these positions, and those are the changes that we're focusing on. But yes, we are very much constrained by supply chain. We get, bids that come in way higher. You have to cancel procurement, failed procurements, things like that do have a big impact. And it's one of those things, I think you hinted on this previously, it takes us a while to do a procurement. And so if we have a failed procurement, that is a 2-year setback. And so, we have the funding program, do we think we're gonna spend it? And then, it takes us a while to get back there.
The one question on the previous slide, I think it would be helpful for this group if you could, after the meeting, provide a supplemental slide that sort of breaks out in the new starts, the purple line versus red line, because I'm sure some of that is.
So that's on slide 13.
Yeah, or 14. Is any of that new starts money red line, or is that all purple line?
So if you go back to slide 13, the breakdown is there, the purple line and red line numbers, it just added together on the next slide.
So purple line, so there's 150 in red line in there? or a change of 52.
Yeah, so basically, purple line has 1.2, red line has 150. You add those together, that adds up to my 1.3 on the next slide.
So so with the change of essentially plus $90 million agency-wide, the delta between purple line and red line is 190 million? more or
So
less?
we added 240 million for the purple line and
Right.
52.6 for the red line.
So if you were to subtract 190 million from this $89 million change, sort of taking out
So no, so that 89, that's the agency-wide projects.
Correct. Oh, that's
That's
not
not
the
a
sum.
total. No, the sum is on slide 13, so we're up overall 373 million in the budget. Purple line is the bulk of that, 240 for the
Got it.
purple, 52 for the red line, 76 for Frederick Douglass Tunnel, the lots are up
Okay.
18 and the state of good repair is down.
Yeah, I think for simplicity, it would be good to just see what the Baltimore area number is versus the agency-wide, if you could supplement that after the meeting.
So agents, so that's just how our projects are categorized, right?
No,
So
I
we
understand,
have-
but to present to this group, given the legislative focus on just the Baltimore pieces.
So I'm not sure how I can do that, like Mark is just Mark, like it is all of Mark, we don't separate
Well, you could
out-
subtract 240 million from 373 million and then. I mean, it would just be easier for this group to see what the Baltimore area number was.
I'll,
I can work with you on that, but
anticipating-
I'm not sure, like, we don't budget Baltimore versus everything else, we budget as a.
I'm gonna leave it to the staff, Don, to sort of, I think we've made clear, to the extent that it is doable, we absolutely need to see what is within Baltimore core versus other stuff. Again, not making value judgments about other stuff, but we just need to see it for analytical purposes. So you just need to work it out. To the extent that it's not doable, then maybe it's not doable. I don't know, whatever it might be, but we need to dig further. And I think, again, this is an iterative process. But, I think, I'm sure the commission wants to be able to evaluate the stuff that we've been asked to look at. So we just need to figure it out.
Yes, I'm happy to work with staff on that, I think this slide basically does that, you can subtract purple line out of the new starts number and you've got. I mean, core bus is Baltimore, light rail is Baltimore, metro is Baltimore. Most of Mark does serve the Baltimore region, ability, lots we can't really aggregate out. And then agency wide again is primarily Baltimore, since that's where most of our service is.
All right. Let's keep going.
I saw Mike McMillan had raised his hand online.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mike McMillan, did you have a question? Commissioner? Folks, is he?
Oh, he's-
I was trying to unmute.
Oh. Can you unmute him on our end, from our end? I think he's got it. Mike? No,
Still
sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Mike, we promise we'll get back.
Oh, he's
Oh, there he is. Okay, go ahead.
I said, you can hear me now?
Coming out there.
A little bit.
Where he's coming out, it should be over the microphone.
But make it loud enough that someone can hear him and then you can.
So we could put it in the chat.
Am I being heard now?
Excellent, perfect. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I just had a question, going back to the purple line, and MTA is contract, has its contract with the purple line, from the time that it began, and to now and in the future with all the costs that are associated with it and seem like it's steadily increasing. How long is is it actually contracted for? MTA has this contract for the, with those who are, involved with the purple line.
So our contract with the Purple Line is a public-private partnership that includes the design build contract. So the contractor will build and deliver the system. And then on top of that, we have a 30-year operate and maintain contract. So Purple Line Transit operators, which is underneath Purple Line Transit Partners, will be the ones who are on board operating and maintaining it for a 30-year period.
Okay, thank you.
Alan, what fiscal year do you expect to start to add construction funding for the red line?
So, I mean, it's gonna kind of depend on funding and when we're able to, but we are looking at different options in terms of being able to deliver the project in as quickly as possible. We're looking at some early construction packages that we could potentially start as early as, FY 26, FY 27 timeframe, but we do want to deliver the project as quickly as we can.
What's that timeframe again?
FY 26, 27, if we
Okay.
can have the funding available, but we're looking again at all sorts of different options in terms of how to construct and what early construction packages might look like.
But right now, we only have design.
We have project development funding, yes, which is for planning primarily, getting us through the 30% design. Okay, so moving on for performance, did just wanna note, as the deputy secretary mentioned, we did have to make some hard choices in this budget. We're gonna be unable to meet those funding levels required by Transit Safety and Investment Act and FY 25, 26. And then back to the question about when TSIA was enacted, I believe it was 2021. So the original TSIA was in FY 2018. Gave 3 years of required funding, and then they changed it again in 2021 to increase it out, I believe, through FY 29. The zero emission bus program is deferred. This is, funding is a big piece of it. An electric bus is basically double the cost of a diesel bus. The cost also then includes the cost of electrification. So we have to retrofit all of our facilities to provide for that electrification and the replacement of our eastern bus facility. So that is deferred for now, as we're going to continue to look at options. We do have the 7 electric buses already on site. We have 20 more that are ordered, and we will be ordering 20 more. So we'll have a total fleet of 47 electric buses that will kind of act as a pilot to see how it works in terms of actual reliability, maintenance, all those other things.
Are you looking at other alternative fuel buses like propane or natural gas as opposed to diesel to try to bridge that gap a little bit?
So in terms of environmental benefits, propane and CNG are basically kind of about the same when we look at the tailpipe emissions of clean diesel. The infrastructure is the issue there, right? So for CNG, there's a bunch of infrastructure we would have to install, same thing for propane. And so the cost difference and the savings isn't really there for us just because we're not set up as an organization to handle those.
Holly, one thing I struggle with, and for me, the learning curve is steep, but I'm trying looking through the CTP. When you look at the CTP, there isn't a line that says state of good repair, right? You have to, so, how do you ultimately, is there a rule, is there a law, a rule, a formula, a convention? When you're sorting all of your stuff, you kind of go state of good repair, not state of good repair. I mean, what is the rule that we use to determine what is state of good repair and what is not? When we conclude things like, well, state of good repair is being cut.
I mean, so TSA, I believe, has a definition in it. We also use the federal definition. So the federal definition of state of good repair is essentially anything that is needed to get the asset to its useful life. And so that's, or replace it once it reaches its useful life. So if, for example, on a vehicle, a metro vehicle, right? We need to replace traction motors. That is the state of good repair project. It's replacing and getting that asset to its useful life. There's regular overhauls that has to happen, replacing track, state of good repair. There are some that kind of hit both buckets, right? So, we're replacing, so replacing buses, diesel buses with electric buses, right? Where does that fall? We end up putting it in the state of good repair category because we have to replace buses, like that is a requirement, and so it falls there. It's just a bit of a higher cost associated with it.
I just want to be sure, and I'm certainly not suggesting this is done with any deliberateness, but I want to make sure that sorting isn't masking in one way or another what people would think of a state of good repair. Because the point you just made, like we could probably have a discussion about whether or not the bus replacement is truly state of good repair or not. I don't know. I haven't read a TSI definition, but just trying to figure out how much cuspiness there is. And you've identified one area where you have some discretion. So it's just something I'm just trying to get everybody on the same page about, because this question about state of good repair is critically important to us. It has all sorts of issues, which we'll get to. So I want to at least make sure that we're all playing with the same understanding of what is SGR and what is not.
Yeah, again, happy to give more
Yeah.
details, but it's all, right, so like replacing a building, so Eastern Bus Facility, it's over 6 years old, it's not in the best condition, it's past its useful life. We have to replace it. We're not gonna replace it with the same crummy building we have today, you know what I mean? Like, there's going to be improvements to that building, we're gonna make it more efficient, it's gonna be a little bit bigger. So it is a state of good repair project because the building needs to be replaced, but it's gonna be nicer than it is, right? So it is a little bit of a cost and a
Address the health
balance.
and wellness issues associated with the building to keep it safe for occupancy.
Right.
Don, would you at some point just get us all a copy of the TSIA, both to see the numbers as well as kind of how it's structured and what the definitions are? Sure. Thank you. I do
Why is
have,
it more important to get the list of what's fallen in your state of good repair bucket? Because I'll tell you, I mean, I've been around, but I wouldn't have thought that your replacement buses would have been in there, cause that makes it more of an issue for me to say, okay, if the state of good repair is being cut and that's where your replacement buses are, we probably need to be raising red flag even more because we already have issues with.
So we are replacing the buses. The buses is state of good repair. We're still replacing the buses. We're just not getting electric buses. We're getting clean diesel buses.
But your state of good repair line has been cut. So if the state of good repair line has been cut, what was in that line that has been cut that affects the service on the street?
So I think the deferral list in the CTP is a really important list to take a look at. I mean, that is the list of what has been cut. So I point you there. Those are the projects that have been removed from the program. We're happy to send that out after.
Thank you.
I would just add that I think over the years, there's been this like kind of binary issue of and in the CTP, things are presented as if they're expansion or if they're not even state of good repair, system preservation, adding in another term that can have a number of different interpretations. So I think that we've been thinking through, how we're presenting the document and making sure that we're adding as much transparency to the different buckets that are in there. But I think when you've got some of the lexicon that's used in our document compared to the terminology that's also used in different pieces of legislation, Holly brought up the great point of how FTA defines it. I made a note for myself to see if Federal Highway defines it differently as well. So, to your point, John, I think it can be difficult to kind of, track and compare. So as much as we can provide and, follow up information with Don to just make sure that we're kind of all understanding, we want to be, as transparent as possible. But I think it has been an ongoing challenge, and I think we hit it even when we do our budget hearings with the legislature of, how do you define the difference between state of repair and system preservation? And it can be a challenge sometimes depending on individual projects.
well, I'm glad we raised it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, one question about the decision to defer the electric bus program is, you mentioned, for example, that there needs to be a new eastern garage, and I see that there's like $200 million cut basically because of the fact that we're not gonna go to zero emission. My question is then, how many years does that put us back? Because once you build that garage, you have to basically wait 20 years until you can do something new, right? So do we understand, is that clear what the impacts really are? Because if you make that choice now, you might need to wait till like 20 years longer before you go to electric bus in that garage. I don't know, how does that impact the process in the future?
I mean, so I think that's the importance of this is a draft budget. Those are the conversations that we need to have between now and the final and what the impacts are. We do have some funding in the budget to do rehabs at that garage. HVAC system needs to be replaced. There's just a lot of issues with it. And so let's make sure we're keeping it going in the meantime. I don't think it sets us back 20 years, but you do start to get the argument, right? Like, when do you invest when you know you're gonna be replacing something? And so trying to, project that out. The one other thing I do wanna mention on electric buses that, I think is really important to get out there is that getting more people on the bus should always be our goal, right? Like, getting people out of single occupancy vehicles onto transit vehicles is better for the environment than, transitioning from a clean diesel to an electric bus. That is also important. Like, we want to continue to look at that and we want to continue to look at that going forward. But ultimately our goal needs to be, and what this budget does is preserve our service, preserves our service to allow us to get more people on the existing buses. And I think that's important now.
Does that impact the facilities for the lots? Because in our county, for example, there's a plan to move to electric buses, but that cannot be taking place without the support basically from MTA, maybe because the fleet size is too small. Is that something that needs to be considered at the county side then as well?
So we haven't removed any of the funding from the lots. The lots have an increased amount of funding in the CTP. And we will continue to support. We have a really good technical team that can help support lots through their transition as they move forward.
One of the reasons, by the way, that to combine a few of these, that I found the tours so valuable, right? We saw that Elizabeth went, I mean, one of the things I learned is it's really hard to buy them. In fact, it's almost impossible to buy them. And since our purpose here is to get more people on buses, budgeting money for imaginary buses is not very productive. So while I regret that, for example, that you're cutting that, if you asked me in advance and you said, John, you know, you have to make some cuts here, I would regret it, but I can see the logic of cutting, you know, of not budgeting for electric buses if our assumption is that it's gonna be really hard to buy them. I mean, that's an externality, right? That you can't control and we have to compensate. It does have other impacts, like the ones that, you know, it does have ripple effects and those have to be accounted for too. But that's why I think it's important and would be helpful for us to be involved in those conversations, to be able to understand them. And it's also an example, just, you know, since it make the point of why that tour, you know, as we stood there and we said, well, all this for 7 buses, blah, blah, and oh, we're buying more buses, but we can't buy more buses, et cetera. So frankly, it didn't surprise me to see that electric buses was higher rather than lower on the deferral list. Because, well, that's probably good management, isn't it? I mean, you have no choice but.
It's all my kind of questions.
Sorry, was there one over here?
No, I'm tying them all together because I always thought the zero emission bus was a legislative mandate, you know,
Right,
so.
There is a legislative mandate, and so as the Deputy Secretary of Mission, we're gonna need to seek a budget reconciliation and finance act changes through the legislature for a couple different items. This is one of them.
But it's funny because I've used John's analogy, the imaginary bus in my head, you know, where you're there, but you can't get them, but. Okay.
Yeah, we talked earlier about ghost buses. The bus that doesn't show up is not a helpful bus.
But will that change the legislative mandate and will that?
Right, it's not gonna help.
Yeah, I'm sure the legislative mandate made sense at the time. I mean, we're not criticizing legislative mandate, it's just reality is colliding, right?
I wanted to kind of take that and extrapolate it a little further because I want to echo the facility tours were really helpful. And I think there's the actual procurement of the buses, but then there's this ancillary operational cost that has to happen both on the capital side in terms of equipment to charge the buses. And can the facilities, Eastern coming to mind, even accommodate that, right? So there's a bundle of funding that has to come along that often is not all bundled together when a mandate comes through. So I too would say that in a general sense, I think that the deferral strategically is one of the better choices and a very tough choices to make. The ones that concern me the most, and there are many across state of good repairs we've already talked to, but is the light rail modernization. I made the point earlier, we are seeing again and again, and the facility really highlighted when we got to go into the operations center. And there was a visual impact to seeing the green on the screen and all the red. And there was a lot more red that was parked and unavailable than there was green operating. And that is something that again and again, I feel like we come back to in these meetings because it's a constant tension. And so to see that did not get fully funded is concerning. And then the same from the facility toward the Eastern bus, like what is really going to be the impact of that not happening? Not just in terms of red line capacity, but really how are we making sure that we're keeping, does it impact service on the Eastern side, I guess is the question that I have.
Yes, let me start with Eastern. So no, I mean, so the current bus facility it's not efficient. It has some issues. We need to make some improvements. The good news is because we were planning on replacing the facility, we've made some changes at our other facilities that will allow us to temporarily move maintenance and move operators over there. So we have that ability to do some rehabs. And as part of that, we'll try and improve some of the efficiency of that. So in terms of service on the street, no, and we're set up for that. Long term, I think you guys are all hitting on this and realizing the interconnectedness of our budget, right? Like everything ties back to everything else, like the decisions do have ripple impacts. And so that's what we're working through. We will be working through, again, it's a draft budget with the General Assembly and the Governor's Office over the the coming months into the session. You mentioned light rail modernization as well, and so that was my next bullet, so let me dive in there. So I'm gonna start with the modernization program and then talk about what we're doing today, kind of where we are with existing vehicles. So modernization program, again, it's not just vehicles. It's not just buying vehicles. We also have to, because we're buying a different type of vehicles, we're going from a high floor vehicle to a low floor vehicle that has a smaller footprint. We have to make changes to our stations. So it's gonna be fantastic in terms of being able to have low floor vehicles that you can actually just walk onto or roll onto and not have to go up to a high block and have our operators kind of let you on. So that's a huge improvement, but we have to make station improvements to do that. So that's a piece of it. We also have to make improvements for the maintenance facilities. We have 2 light rail maintenance facilities, one at North Avenue, one at Cromwell, both of which will have to be retrofitted to change the lifts, things like that. And then the other thing that the systems, Secretary Wiedefeld talks about systems all the time. They exist behind, no one realizes, but it is really what's driving the ability for the controllers to see that green and the red on the screen. Our train control system is also 30 years old and needs to be replaced. And so that's the other piece of this pie. So right now in the program, the vehicles are funded. Overall, we're about 380 million short for the rest of the items in the program period. There's some that goes out beyond it. We're working really closely with MDOT right now to see what other options there are, alternative delivery, alternative financing. We're looking at really grant programs because we know the importance of this. And I know some of the questions that I've got too, if you're not gonna, some of the other delays have been, track, right? So like, if you're not gonna fix the tracks, why are you buying vehicles? Track, we have other options on, right? Like track, we can change how we do maintenance. You can single track, like there's other things that you can do. The timing on that is not as long. Like the lead time of a vehicle, once we issue NTP, it's probably 6 years before we get the first vehicle in versus the track we've got more flexibility on. And so that's why we're prioritizing the vehicles now over some of the other items, just because the importance of ensuring that we have those vehicles available.
Are you, I'm sorry, Sloan, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Mine is a fairly easy question. When I look at the project deferral list, all kind of questions come up for me, but I'm just curious as to when I look at things like deferral replacement of escalators and elevators and rehab, those things that they're happening at our rail facilities, that has an impact on service delivery and modern conveniences. And so I'm just curious about that. And then the metro station improvements, things of that nature. There's HVAC, deferring 8 HVAC upgrades, a host of things at the metro stations. So when we're looking at these deferrals and being focused on core service delivery and convenience for our transit riders, I'm curious to know how, I know it was hard, right? That these decisions were super tough when you're balancing everything that you need and you're looking at your wallet that you have to spend. But some of them are a little scary when I think about them. So I'm just curious about some of these facility improvements that are being deferred. And it looks like there's some stormwater management repair and retrofit on here as well. So like, what's happening?
I think everybody's shuffling pages looking for this list. The list was not distributed. It was distributed in the sense that it's a page in the CTP. It is page, help me out here. PD 2 or page 50. So, Don, maybe it makes sense. I don't want to post, but maybe someone could just quickly at least make some copies of that so people don't have to go looking for it or printing it out. Yeah, because it is, I mean, it goes to the question of, and I'm sorry, I want to let you answer this. It goes to the question of why is this list this list? And I think at some point we're going to want to understand
It's
that.
a whole separate meeting.
Yeah.
And I do want to come back to finish my answer on the light rail vehicles where we are today too. I don't know if you want me to do that first or dive in here, but I did want to note like the light rail vehicles today, right? Because I think this keeps coming up. I know CMTA sent a letter just to highlight like where we are, how are we going to get, once we issue NTP 6 years for the first vehicle, to that point. So right now, any given day, we have anywhere between 19 and 21 vehicles available. That is kind of where we're at. There's a number of things that are driving that. One is accidents. We've had a decent amount of accidents with our vehicles, whether running into cars. The summer where trees kept coming down, we have a vehicle where it ran into a tree and there's a tree inside the vehicle, like things like that that have caused body damages to our vehicles. So I think there's about 6 vehicles there that have been sent up to our contractor to take a look and see what changes they can do, how we can get those back in service. We have some warranty issues with the vehicles that have come in, so we're still working with the contractor through those warranty issues to make those fixes. We're not gonna put a vehicle in service if it's not safe, and so we're working through that. And I think just due to the increase in age of the vehicle, we are seeing increased corrective maintenance. So the needs for our staff to do corrective maintenance on the vehicles have increased. So we're tackling all of those, right? So in terms of the accident vehicles, we're working with our contractor, we're working with the contractor on the warranty and some of the parts issues there. Corrective maintenance, we're working really closely with the union, with our staff there. We brought in some quality assurance people to help us look through how we're managing on a day-to-day basis, how we can think about it differently. And so we are really attacking that at all levels. We want to get more vehicles out there. We want to provide, 2 and 3 packs for games. And so we're working towards that and with the goal of ensuring that we will have light rail vehicles through the life of these. So that is currently happening. In terms of your question on how did we choose those projects? Deputy Secretary mentioned our asset management program. It's a pretty robust program. We have a lot of data about our assets, about age, condition. And so we use that data, right? So we dove in and we made sure that we're again focusing on safety first. So what projects are, if it fails, will it not be safe? So we're really, that is the number one. We look at rider impact again. So like what is gonna have the impact on our riders, the largest impact on our riders as we're making those decisions. And then just making some tough decisions, right? Like we are delaying the escalator program. So we're gonna do rehabs, but we may see escalators out. There will be elevators available, there will be stairs available. So we are, we did focus on making sure that we kept the funding for the elevator since that's an ADA issue, whereas escalators are our other options. So it's not easy, it's a series of hard choices and we're continuing to do that. I also wanna note, we are, like that list exists today. We're looking at our projects constantly. On a daily basis, we have a program management oversight group that is responsible for looking at like, hey, what can you do over here with changing your maintenance practices, right? We were gonna do it as a capital project, maybe we can change maintenance practices and get some of it done in this other area. How can we, the most safety critical piece of this, bundle into another project? Like so that list as it exists today probably won't exist in that same way in a month and a year, just because we're constantly looking to see how we can be more efficient, how we can leverage our dollars to the best available. Thank you.
Just to follow up on the light rail card question, so I understand what you're saying. You're saying that you can cut the light rail infrastructure, stations, et cetera, because the cars are not gonna show up for a long enough time that you can worry about the station stuff. I'm just trying to make sure I
I'm saying
understand.
we're prioritizing the vehicles over the track because of the lead time. Right, like if we delay vehicles for a year, right, like it just keeps delaying when we can get vehicles, like it is about 6 years till we get vehicles. On the track side, again, there are different things that we can change how we do maintenance, how we bundle it into other projects. Doing a track project, from start to finish is 2 years. Doing a vehicle project from start to finish is 10 years. And so because of that, we have prioritized the vehicles over some of the other infrastructure.
But have you taken, this is maybe too much in the weeds, but have you taken money out of the CTP in the 3rd year and the 4th year and the 5th year when you're now suggesting you might be able to do those things? Or are you saying you haven't, or you have, but you can put it back in? Because it's a 6-year program, right? So if theoretically, and I'm trying to look at it, if theoretically you zeroed it out for 6 years, right? Then you'd be like, well, wait a second, I mean, using your example, it needs to show up at some point.
So it does need to show up at some point, and that's where, again, we're continuing to look and see how we can make it show up in different ways. Like this is, my preference would be that's in there and we're not worrying about it, but it's not. And so we're working through that and we're gonna continue to work through that and make sure that we're fitting it in when we can.
All right.
All right, last bullet on this slide, just wanted to note, it does defer corridor expansion planning efforts except for the Red Line and the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit project. So our north-south corridor project is being put on hold at this time as our other planning efforts. We do have funding to update the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan, which I know this group is going to be helping us with, but the corridor planning efforts coming out of the last RTP, including some of our transit priority initiatives and things like that, are now put on hold.
Karen, please.
Just a quick question. I know like earlier this year, you all were running the Be More Bus plan, and that was looking at a 3 to 10 year expansion with potential fifth bus division. Obviously that's on hold. You know, where do you anticipate, you know, potential expansion of services being looked at again? And kind of what would be the message to the people who participated in that effort, and on kind of where that could be?
So we're still gonna publish that plan. I think it is still important to do planning, right? Like, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to plan for the future. We have to plan for an assumed increase in funding at some point. And so we wanna let people know, if and when that happens, what will we use it towards? So you should see a draft plan coming out later this fall, and then a final plan towards the end of the year. So we are moving forward with that, and we wanna let people know, like, hey, with more money, here's what we can accomplish.
So moving forward with the plan, but just holding off on the implementation until it's.
Quick question.
Please, Leslie.
I think you've answered it, but I know you guys have been very successful with securing a lot of federal grants, but they have local match. Are any of them in threat of not being able to secure the local match?
So with the grants that we have now, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't note the light rail modernization program. If we're not able to move forward with that within the next year or so, like, we may end up having that grant match at risk, or that grant at risk. We are taking a hard look at the projects that we apply for going forward to ensure that, you know, where does this fall priority wise over some of the other initiatives that we have going on? So that is a continued focus. So that's where, you know, importance of partners and bringing other folks into some of these so that we can be successful with those applications.
I'm gonna give you an opportunity to put a little bit out there. So if you had your druthers, what specific deferral concerns do you have the most, and why?
You know, so I think one thing I wanna note is maintaining service is really important, and I'm grateful that this budget does allow us to maintain service. We're moving forward with some critical projects. I don't know that it's a specific project, because again, we're continuing to fund everything to ensure we have a safe system, and we're not gonna run a system that's not safe. It's more just the volatility of the program. You know, we've talked several times about it takes us a while to do procurements. It takes us a while to get things going. You know, the zero emission bus is a good example. It's taken us 4 years to get here, right? In terms of the planning, in terms of building staff capacity, in terms of like starting to execute on that plan. And then when you have this volatility of not being able to do a project, like, you lose a lot of momentum. And so the staff capacity that we've built up, I worry about losing that staff capacity. The progress that we've made in terms of delivering, I wanna make sure we're able to continue on that. And I think that is my largest worry, just being able to deliver the program that we have and continue to show that we are a good investment. Investing in transit is important.
Okay, oh, this is a good slide. Let's do this one.
Okay, I think I've got 2 more slides, I'm almost done. I was trying to get in front of a question, which is like, what is the gap in terms of unfunded needs? I mean, so this is basically our 6-year draft CTP, what is in the CTP now, broken down into categories. You can see state of good repair is the bottom purple, expansion is orange, maybe that's a purple red combined, turned into orange, I'm not sure there. We have the lots funding as our bright pink, enhancements is the very small bar there. Frederick Douglass Tunnel is red, and then the gap between our state of good repair and enhancement needs is what you can see there in gray. I will note that this is, again, a snapshot in time. We're constantly looking at what our budget needs are, how we're doing things. And so we're going to be publishing the next round of the capital needs inventory July of next year. And so this is kind of where we are today. We're continuing to refine to make sure that we have the best information and data to put out there. And so it will show what that gap is coming next July as well.
So quick visual observation, the proportionality of the gap increases year over year, not decreases. I'm observing that visually.
Yeah.
So as astute as that might be, can you speak a little bit about, you know, why we're not seeing the inverse, that we're able to address it over time? To be fair, you said it's a snapshot in time. But that obviously gives this body a pretty big concern, that it's going to get greater over time, not less.
I mean, part of it is pay now or pay later, right? Like the longer you wait to do things, the cost inflation increases every year. And so I think that's a bit of it. I mean, and we've, said previously in these meetings, our average state of good repair need, enhancement need that we anticipate over the coming years is closer to $1 billion. And our funding levels are not there. So that's really what's kind of driving.
Folks, what you're getting here is, I think.
Sorry, I have a couple more slides. Do you want me to finish? or-
No, I'm sorry, I'm just explaining. What you're getting going around is the list of project deferrals. It includes, I think, all the project deferral pages. The MTA one is actually on the back of the first page, PD2, just so you know, which is at the bottom, 672 million. So you can just get you'll see, I think, is this all of them?
Yeah, state
Yeah, you can see the mode name at the top of each of the blocks. Sorry, Al.
No, it's good.
I think it's important to point out that the costs in here, the 6-year totals are not necessarily removal of the entire amount of money from the entire budget from a particular project, but it could stand for a reduction as well. So, and if you go into the program to look at each line, you may need to add several together to understand the notes that are often in the project line. Yeah, that talk about the reduction.
We'll get to sort of next steps, like how we're gonna go forward from here, because it's complicated, but Holly, please keep going.
So I mentioned operating budget earlier, so way back when, bringing that back, our FY25 operating budget is 1.18, just shy of $2 billion. I want to note that it does include additional funding for the commuter bus service that went into effect in July. So again, making sure we're maintaining that service there, and an increase for the contract agreement that the mobility contractors had with their unions to have that wage increase to ensure that we can continue to provide quality service there. As always, our program is driven by bus operations, which includes core bus, commuter bus, and mobility. Rail is the next biggest pie there, as in the statewide programs, which is mostly lots and a little bit for freight. In our administration, our budget is driven by service. Like that is what drives our operating budget. There's not a lot of fluff there outside of service.
I'm sorry, I just have to ask because on slide 17, the construction fund, and I know that we are in design, but you have sections there for red line and purple line over the years. Did you consider some type of construction funding in these numbers?
These numbers are reflective of what is in the actual CTP, so it includes the purple line funding and the red line funding.
Are you referring
So the
to-
reason that you see numbers in 28, 29, 30.
Cause this is over FY26 to FY30 unfunded needs. You're showing the funding that you have for red line currently.
Red line and purple.
Red line and purple line currently, so over the years, what did you account for in FY26 and 27, 28, 29 for red line funding?
In the gap.
In the gap, it's only for state of good repair. It does not include the needed funding for the rest.
So what's the funding that you have in the red line and purple line?
In the orange line item, so that is what is programmed in the CTP for the red line and what is programmed for the purple line. The reason the purple line doesn't decrease after FY27 is because then we start in service and there are availability payments.
We have to keep paying for the purple line even after it's in service?
So it's a P3, we have purple line availability payments on the operating budget and on the capital budget. So the capital budget includes some debt service as well as their ongoing capital maintenance. And so you will see continued funding for the purple line needed. It's between 175 and 200 million yearly. It ranges in the capital budget, and then I think a similar amount in the operating budget.
Each of those increments is 200 million, if you just look at the scale on the left, each of the line increments. Is the orange, red line, purple line meaning it is only that, or that the red line and purple line are, because the orange is actually called expansion. So is red line and purple line together occupy the entire orange block?
Yes.
Could you give us a version of this that has the red line and purple line separate, as we've talked about?
So does that also include the settlement payments to the prior contractor?
Those have already been budgeted and I think all paid. There may be one last settlement.
25, there's
There's settlement payment?
There's some that are tethered to the milestones.
There's something tied to it,
But they should be reflected.
But it is.
That should be reflected in these numbers.
Great.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, of course.
Because we're seeing, as you mentioned already, that there is additional gap, basically. How much would the gap reduce if we would fund more today for tomorrow, for example, if we spend? I can imagine if we cut some budgets today, the cost in the future might be twice as much or something. How does that work, so to say? Do you have an idea?
I mean, in scenario planning, like,
Right,
yeah,
right,
we
exactly.
we can put some numbers to that and give you some examples if that's helpful, but I mean, I don't off the top of my head.
No, but I was thinking if we cut $10 million now, does it cost us $50 million more later, or 100 million, or 20 million? I think that may be interesting to know for people.
I think it also
Same
gets
way.
back to Holly's point about volatility as well. I mean, there's also then the cost of a potential emergency repair, which is something that she's had to build in as well.
Right.
So I think your point is very well taken.
Right, I mean, another way of saying what you said is, I think it's the same, maybe it's not the same point, so I'll just make it, which is you might actually just be wasting money, literally, by making an emergency repair today. You have to do it because you have safety concerns, and it is of no value whatsoever when you then go and do the thing. So if you had the money to do the thing now, I mean, it's not just increased costs and everything else, it's like, it's just, we gotta spend this money and we're never gonna see it again, and it's not gonna have any impact on the replacement.
And that's correct. I mean, we've budgeted some funding for emergencies to respond to things when they come up, because again, we know we won't do something if it's not safe, but we will be able to respond to emergencies when they come up.
What else have you got? Madam Administrator.
So we talked operating budget. I don't think any questions on that. And then finally, last slide. So going forward, right? So where are we going from here? Again, we want to continue to build on the momentum that we have and our capacity to spend. We know we need to be able to spend more in order to meet our stated good repair needs, and we need to show that, again, that we are a good investment. I've noted our improvements on budget performance on both capital and operating. On the operating side, we ended our budget FY24 within 2 million of our budget, which in a $1.2 billion budget, I think is pretty fantastic. So I'm proud of the work we've done there. We're continuing to do the same thing on the capital side. We're going to continue to advance safety critical work. Again, that is our number one priority, and we're going to make sure we're doing that. And again, leveraging those stated good repair funds as best we can. So the snapshot in time that you see today is going to continue to change as we get creative, as we look at different options, as we continue to work to leverage the funds that we do have.
Scott?
I hate to go back to the beginning, but can you, because I think I may have a comment after this, can you remind me of the requirement of doing this and the purpose? I mean, you said this was the first presentation. So can you remind us of the requirements for doing CTP presentation and who that goes to, and then the purpose of doing that?
Let me defer to Deputy Secretary.
So just the overall CTP process of where we go.
Well, the public side.
Public side. So through the legislation that brought this body together, we bring you, this plan now, and this is, comment and feedback that we will take back into account as we prepare, our final plan that gets submitted to the legislature, along with the governor's budget, is the third Wednesday in January. And then through separate requirements, we then do tours that have to occur between September 15th and November 15th with all counties and Baltimore City. So those dates should all be posted online, and so those meetings are scheduled and will be convened somewhat similarly as a public meeting, along with transportation staff and elected leadership from each jurisdiction. So we'd certainly encourage you to, attend, tune in, and participate in those meetings as well, because we want to continue to solicit feedback.
Are these public meetings or these just for leaders?
Public meetings.
So I asked that because I really want to just go to, I sat through the presentation because I'm not the technical person. And I got to tell you, you can turn gray listening to this presentation. But the most important information that I think was available to people is the deferral list. I mean, this is where people start seeing where these impacts hit them the most. And this is where, if we're talking about us, not just us being public advocates for transit systems, but having people be engaged in this, the technical information will get lost on. And so we need to find a better way to make this stuff relevant to people who are riders or drivers or walkers. I mean, I saw sidewalk deferrals in here, or people who are in wheelchairs who can't get to and from places, because outside of that, people are not going to necessarily be paying attention to the big lofty numbers. I think, and I also think, Mr. Chairman, when you asked about disaggregating between red line and purple line, I think it's also helpful to disaggregate between the system modes, both in WMATA and in Baltimore. Even though we don't want to compare, people want to see how they're going to be affected versus somebody else. And I think I would worry, I would be one who would be worrying about the differential impact of system decisions on citizens of Baltimore region versus the citizens of Washington region, and how do we resolve the two? But people need to have that information as a way of being a part of the public process. I think it's very, very important now.
Yeah, and that's helpful feedback, and again, I think in terms of rider impacts, right, like it's tough to say, you know, we don't necessarily know when something's gonna happen, when we're gonna need to react, when we'll have to do an emergency repair. And so when those happens, we will make sure that we're notifying our riders, and that's gonna be a piece of that. But yeah, overall, a large capital budget with over 850 projects, it is difficult.
For an escalator and a person using a cane, you know, has to make another set of decisions. And that's the kind of stuff that we need to think about.
At some point, you know, operating budget always kind of gets in a short shrift, and admittedly, this is the CTP, not the OTP. So at some point, we should talk about how to work, you know, get people up to speed, because my sense here is, frankly, that in the course of the last, whatever, 6 months and culminating today, this commission is getting pretty sharp on the CTP issues and the capital issues and all the surrounding issues. So let me just talk about next steps for a moment, because we've still got less than a half an hour if we stay on schedule, and still a bunch of stuff to go through. I don't think anybody other than Don Halligan could have gone through this in the 3 days that we've had to do it and give advice to me, vice chair, just to sort of help us, you know, frame this up a bit. So thank you, Don, for doing that. It's very, very valuable. The hard work continues, which is we now have to really dig into this. We have to come up, I've asked Don to come up with a set of sort of proposed feedback, right, for us to consider. Because what I expect we need to do here now is to say, well, thank you for the draft CTP. And here's our feedback. And it's the things we're talking about here for sure. I think the broad themes are probably pretty clear at this point, but it should be very specific. I have to admit, I have a hard time discerning some of the numbers. I mean, I've been through this over the last several days, and I've looked at the CTP before. It's very confusing. Again, Don's expertise is great. He's gotten great cooperation just in the course of a couple of days from MTA and MDOT in terms of, like, are you saying this or are you saying that? Do you mean this? Am I reading this correctly? So that needs to continue. And then I've asked Don to put together for us what he would propose as sort of, you know, the BRTC has these comments on the CTP, and they'll be thematic and they'll also be specific, and there may be some more dialogue. The window, I mean, the CTP is finalized in January as part of the governor's budget. So we really do have a window. I think we could probably discuss and ratify such a thing at the next commission meeting. Does that sound right to you? And still be enough time to do it and then enough time to submit it, sort of on both ends. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I would say we have until early November.
Right, so, okay, so I think the next commission meeting, early October, is a perfect time for us to try, and we'll have digested this, you all will think about it. Don gave in one of his emails, gave a little roadmap, you know, look, you should be looking at these things. I'm sure people haven't had a chance in the last 3 days, but you will have a chance in the next, 3 days or the next week or whatever to look at. And if you have questions, again, your questions may be sort of a different version of what I just described. I'm seeing this. Is this what this says, or is this not what this says? Don't ask me, ask him. But ask him, and he'll be able to give you some response. So that's the process that I envisioned, but I expect us to comment, in a detailed way. It's part of our job, and that's what I think the next steps are. Does that make sense? Anybody want to modify that in any way?
John, how do you see us getting those comments? Don, just getting them to him?
Yeah, I just think you just gotta send him questions, send him comments, and Don will have to engage with.
If that's easier. I would also say that I think what would be probably most beneficial for everyone is that if you're not talking to your county governments who are going to be visited by the department, do so, share the comments with them, develop a dialogue between you and the county executive, whomever it is you're representing.
And then keeping in mind that this rolls into a report that's due
Right.
December
December the 1st, yes, we have a
So-
report, and Don is also, we're gonna talk about that, I think, in this agenda, just at least to update you. On, because we do have a statutorily required report, which will include a bunch of things we'll get to in a sec. But, so yeah, I think, Don, that's what you're describing is, you know, is a reasonable approach to try and get all of this, you know, memorialized in an appropriate, in a way. Look, the CTP, you know, like historically, doesn't change much between the draft and the final. I hope this year's the exception, you know? And the other thing was, when Joe McAndrew was here, those of us who served in the Train Commission know that one of the recommendations of the Train Commission, which the department, Samantha could comment on, is readily accepted, is to reconfigure, rethink the CTP process, which is widely viewed as very ineffective. It's a tour, if you've been to those, not much happens, it really isn't very constructive. There ain't no discussion like this in any of the other CTP.
You raised the bar.
At the CTP, but admittedly, we have a pretty specific, we're here essentially as subject matter experts with advice and such on transit. Jurisdictions have broader concerns, but they're public meetings, the elected officials themselves are there. It's typically an exchange of remarks, an exchange of comments, sometimes an exchange of speeches. Everybody recognizes that system, that CTP system can be better. I think, if I'm right, the department's concluded it is very committed to that, but won't happen really for this year. This year will look more like prior years, okay, you know, that's the way it is. But it would be great if for the jurisdictions that are represented here, just to reiterate what Don said, if we could communicate with our appointers or whatever we might call them, our principals, to sort of say, how do we make those CTP sessions look more like this, at least with respect to the things of which we're concerned about. And, you know, we'll do the best we can to do that. The schedule is available on the NDOT website. Let's send it around. I just forget when the jurisdictions come up. I think it gets to the Metro Baltimore jurisdictions around the middle of the process, but I don't remember for sure.
Howard County is September 18th at 6 p.m. Anne Arundel is October 7th at 6 p.m. And then Baltimore County and Baltimore City are both on October 21st. I think the county gets the morning.
That's right.
No, I think it's other way.
Other way?
Yeah.
I was thinking I finished in the city.
Okay, so did you have something? You had your hand up, I'm sorry, Mike.
The only thing I was gonna flag was, and Don can share this when he sends the draft ideas, is just to think about tailoring the letter to the requirements of the legislation, and we'll send that out, and that's why I was focused on, you know, specifically the Baltimore area parts of the CTP, because that's what the legislation gives us the purview for this group, and there are ways of identifying that. It takes a little more work, and it involves going line by line through the process, and that's certainly something our staff can do. But as we're thinking about this, it's such a big document. I would just gently remind the commission to be focused on the role laid out in the statute, which is big enough.
All right, so I'm sorry, let me hear.
Just to, you know, just want to comment as we kind of prepare that letter and our comments. I know, you know, looking at the CTP, when I was in my prior life, the budget's the budget. I mean, you can't manufacture money, and you're trying to balance these priorities. So, you know, one thing I would, maybe this is something more for the Train Commission, but maybe our job, we can maybe into it or something. What are the solutions out there to look at, you know, the revenue issues, and, you know, is there's something structurally wrong, because as long as I've been in government, it keeps coming back to the same thing. And it's kind of frustrating, quite frankly. I mean, I see other states prospering in some of their transportation projects. What are we not doing, and how can we do it better? And it would be nice to ask the question. I mean, it's one thing to get in a battle over priorities with a very limited pot of money, but, you know, there's a structural problem here. And I think there's a larger question we should at least ask, or just ask that we get an answer to. So that's my,
It's an excellent, that is,
I'd like
that
that.
is the overarching zoomed out question.
it is, and some of those are hard conversations to have. I mean, you're talking about tax revenue, nobody likes to have that kind of conversation, but there's gotta be a different way to look at it, so.
Thank you. So, I know the rest of this agenda is enough to say we're not gonna cover it in 15 minutes. We will cover it in 30. So if you can hang with us till 12:45 instead of 12:30, I would really appreciate it. So I'm gonna turn it back to Don to try and keep us moving.
Thank you. Gonna make that point, we have 4 more items here, some of which we could go through pretty quickly. Like the next one, which is the topic that was broached earlier. We are required to produce a report to the General Assembly and the Governor by December 1st. It's now September. I wanted to start that conversation. And remind you all of the requirement facing us. And I had a couple of slides to kind of walk us through it. So it's on or before December 1st each year, we're to provide this report. The reports document our work, our findings, and any recommendations we want to make. And on the Baltimore system, transit system, and that can include both MTA and LIS. The requirement is in code and statute, and it reads, the commission shall report to its findings and recommendations on the Baltimore Regional Transit System. Straightforward, but important for us to begin to focus on. So between now and that date, we'll be reaching out. We'll be starting to talk in a little more detail what we should include in that report. We'll have a mock-up draft probably in October for you all to take a look at, provide some insight. So that was that item.
So can I just, I'm just gonna take 30 seconds to say, we've obviously begun talking about this. My expectation is that this report will include an overview of what the agency is up to, because I want people to be able to pick this thing up and learn something about MTA. I don't want to start at the middle, I want to start at the beginning, but I don't want to tell an entire, it's not a novel. So we're going to be asking staff and MTA to help us, although most of the stuff frankly exists already. I just think it's useful as people look at the report to have sort of a status report on MTA, which is going to be fairly easy to do. And then, it's what has the commission been up to? What have we prioritized? I've been very adamant that each of these 3 work groups need to accomplish some part, because it'll continue, some part of their assigned task as feeding up into that report. Because I think each of the work groups has the potential to make recommendations. Some of them could potentially be legislative recommendations, and therefore important to get in before the General Assembly session. And then, of course, the broader stuff. It might include budget, might include Aaron, observations regarding the need for more revenue, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not intended to be, immensely long, but I want it to be meaningful. I have read the reports from, what you might think of as analogous bodies like the Maryland Aviation Administration as a commission, the Maryland Port Commission. They tend to be, here's what the agency did this year. That's not what I'm after. I mean, there's some of it, and because I think MTA, the story should be there, they deserve credit for what they've done, but that's not gonna move the needle, right? So it's gotta be, the commission's been hard at work for the better part of a year. Here's what we've done, here's what we think, here's what we think you ought to be doing, et cetera. And we'll have to come to that together, but that's what you should expect, and that's what we should be focusing on in terms of making this report impactful. It's not intended to be a check the box, at least not as far as I'm concerned. Thanks.
I'm curious.
Yes, sir.
In the past, have there been any recommendations where there has been a true or real change?
Well, that we've never, existed, so I don't know. I guess we'll see. Certainly, there are plenty of reports from various entities that have affected real change. Train Commission, affected real, just so far as the Train Commission went, which was not super far. think those recommendations had an impact in terms of the funding side, but see. All right. Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, some of the mega commissions, yeah.
Can I just suggest that
Of course.
having some deadlines so that we can get to you our comments done by the time you need them, because then we'll need to circulate, I would think, among all of us, and they'll be back and forth, and there might need to be some additional ad hoc meetings, just some deadlines, so that we have more time to adjust all of this and get back to
Great
you.
idea. We can work something up for you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
I just, the next item is talking about the work groups, but I did want to thank MTA for hosting the commission in a couple of small groups to tour some of the facilities. I think everybody got a good chance to see what work they do and how complicated it is and some of the challenges they're facing. So thank you.
Just, there were two groups, no? You mentioned one group, but there were
Yes.
two groups.
Yeah. Yes. So I think as everybody know, we divided up the commission into a couple of smaller work groups, focusing on some issues. Those issues being project and program delivery, staffing, and the rider experience. In August, we met as the project and program delivery work group. That group is examining some of these issues that we've talked about earlier in the CTP discussion on procurement. We're doing MTA has some very complicated procurements that they've put out. It's solicited and has some challenges in terms of the law and what they're required to do in that aspect. This group is looking at those issues. They're going to be looking at property management and tort claims, liability issues at their next meeting that I hope to be in the next couple of weeks. And then I can see a report being developed by the group documenting these issues. This is our little work plan for the analysis of procurement issues. Fundamentally, MTA does not share the same exemptions to the Board of Public Works. Adds time and money to getting their procurements secured. As other parts of MDOT. So for instance, MDOT and MDTA are given an exemption on capital expenditures for roads, bridges, and highways up front. The law is relatively unclear as it pertains to maintenance activities for roads, bridges, and highways. So it could be a very large exemption. For the work group meeting, we did have a chance to talk to the comptroller staff who mentioned they don't like these exemptions. So they would like to get rid of them. I don't know if that makes it it definitely doesn't make it any easier on the MTA if that were the case. It may make it harder on other parts of the department to do procurements.
They don't like them, meaning that they don't think that they should have them?
They don't think they should have them. It's a vestige of history that's it's been ongoing for years. So they're as the comptroller staff at least, and you mentioned the treasurer staff felt the same. They don't believe that ought to exist. So including MTA under the same exemptions may be problematic. That's something we need to talk about, and we need to go into further with the department and with the board staff.
I think it's sort of axiomatic, as I said, that nobody wants less authority. But nonetheless, this is an inequity that I think we want to look at. Because that's part of what we're here to do, is to identify, as we've talked today.
Yep.
Where is MTA not like the others, and why is that?
Right, and the department was very helpful in getting us information about their procurements this year. There are procurement agency activity reports that document some of the procurement activity of the department. We need to kind of dive into those a little more deeply to understand what is included and what isn't included. And I've got a commitment from the department to help us do that, to be able to bring that back to the work group and develop some recommendations for them. This just documents what I just talked about. So this is the property management problem and goal here. We want to understand the management practices and best practices. MTA, unlike SHA, does not have, SHA has quick claim where they can get right of way for their projects. MTA, it does not require a whole lot of right of way, or hasn't in the past, but as they do more projects that will require right of way, quick claim would be a nice addition to their ability to get control.
You know, I will note, you know, you think expansion projects, right of way requirements, but even things like the train control for the new light rail vehicles, there's some additional central instrument house expansions that we're gonna need that require right of way. So even our boring state of good repair projects that don't have a lot of sizzle, like, do still require real estate.
Right away is acquisition of land. It doesn't matter what it's for, really. In looking at the property management issue, this issue kind of comes in very quickly. It's tort claims and liability, where MTA is not part of the Maryland, or the Local Government Tort Claims Act, Maryland Tort Claims Act, that local governments and state government enjoy. All other agencies, I point out, except MTA. MTA is given its specific mandate under the transportation article, and it's much more complicated for them to be able to bring in businesses, to work with businesses, because they have a $5 million insurance requirement upfront anytime they do business with MTA, or if they want to use MTA's real estate, if they want to use a parking lot, they're required, community group is required to put up a $5 million, have $5 million worth of insurance, liability insurance. So
not many community groups use a lot.
Yeah. So that's a problem for them, and they can't be a good neighbor in some instances. And it's hard to do business, so it costs them more to do business. And having that same protection as other state agencies would be good. This is an issue we're going to be talking about at the next meeting. The staffing work group, I'm gonna have Jake talk about it, but I think what I'll do is, we're running short on time, it's gonna run through this. We did meet in August. The task here is to update a report that was done in 2022, looking at staffing, hiring and retention issues for MTA. And we have begun that effort. We are working with MTA to do that. We are sharing what we get with the work group, getting their input on that. There is interestingly, there is a FTA backed transit workforce staffing conference that's coming to Baltimore. It's a national conference. It's coming in November. We're going to look into that to see if some of the staffing participate in that, to understand some of how some of the issues nationally, because what MTA is facing is all that they're facing around.
Maybe helpful to talk with Mike on that. So he and I have both worked closely with the Transportation Workforce Center. They're based out of Silver Spring on a number of issues, and we're going to highlight some of the successes that we've had partnering with the union at that conference. And so it's really good for us.
The rider experience work group has not met yet. Their charge is to understand the current experience and challenges and develop some strategies to address those challenges. I guess today I can announce that we are opening a webpage where we're trying to obtain people's riders' experience on MTA, how they're doing with it, what their hopes and dreams are for it. So our website is up. It's a little short survey to ask some questions to help populate what we hope to be is a map that we can provide with people's stories around the region. Questions on any of this?
December 1st.
December 1st, yes. Yeah, we need to get. I have some notes on this. I wanted to share with you all where we are on the transit governance and funding study in creating a transit authority here region. As I think everybody knows, it's building on our past efforts, our past work. Remains key focus. So I expect to be back in October to share a more detailed description of our work and get your insights and support on how we might turn these into actionable plans. Conceptually, this builds on our prior work and to really increase the region's autonomy over transit service development. We are expecting in this study to create several governance and funding options. A baseline assumption is that this autonomy that we're talking about creating is going to require some additional money to help support it. We're going to be identifying a baseline of need, transit need and funding need for additional funding, and sources for such revenue. We're starting off using two basic structures, a commission model and an authority model. And we're identifying some key questions for each issues around each of those. We've identified peers and a baseline to refine the models. And the outcome we hope to get is a document that of these refined models and a recommendation for on a funding approach. So here we're looking at these three options at the moment. Option one is a regional transit authority, RTA, that owns and operates a system and remains housed and controlled by the department. It's a little different than an administration. It's an authority. It would have its own controlling board that may have some regional representation that needs to be all worked out. Option two is an independent RTA, where all assets and contracts are going to transfer from the entity, from the MTA, and have its own governing board with a mix of state and local representation. Option number three here is a fiduciary commission that's going to be responsible for allocating dedicated revenue to transit operators and providers in the region. It could include MTA and the lots. some of our basic assumptions. Fundamentals here is that all the models that we're looking at are going to require MDOT and MTA to reorganize, and some are going to be more disruptive than others. The funding strategy is going to be the key to the success or failure. We're going to separate out core services from non-core statewide services. So that would be a division that we'd need to figure out. This is our score sheet of each of the options with the criteria down the left-hand side. Mentioned peers in the first option where it remains within MDOT. We were considering the Boston system, MBTA, or the New Jersey Transit system, where New Jersey Transit recently created a board or expanded their board in 2018. In this option, MTA remains within MDOT. It's governed by a state-controlled board. The board may have some regional representation. It would have some kind of dedicated revenue required and additional revenue that would need to be identified. Planning and operations would be primarily led by MDOT with formal input of the board, and lots would remain separate. In the second option, we're generally looking at SEPTA as a model. I would point out that none of the peers seem to be perfect. You know, we need to create our own entity here because of our own unique circumstances. For the independent RTA, SEPTA is a model we're looking at. All the contracts, all the assets would be transferred, all the liability would be transferred to this independent entity, and it would be governed by a new board with shared responsibility. It would require dedicated revenue and additional revenue to operate, to be successful. And in this option, our locally operated transit systems would be absorbed into that entity. Option 3 here is a fiduciary model where all the funding side would be the responsibility of the entity, the commission, be regionally controlled. Regionally controlled, would have a dedicated revenue source, also require additional revenues to be successful. And the lots in this scenario could be separate. Here are some key differences that we're seeing between and within each of the options. For the option 1, gives you more transparency. It's probably least disruptive. It keeps state investment in there. Some of the disadvantages.
Sorry, Don, can we defer this slide? Because I think people can, it's in the materials, right?
Yeah, it is, yes.
I think people can.
Yeah. Here's our schedule. We started in July. We're planning to come with more detail in October.
One question to the ones with the columns. None of them reflects today's situation then, or of the 3, right?
This is we're talking a new thing.
Is it helpful to have our current situation to the in that same column? So that
Yeah, we can
try to
put
compare
that in there.
for better understanding.
Yeah, I don't think this is not the report. This is just a status report. I think the baseline is, it's inherent that the baseline, it's a good suggestion, we should.
Sure. Right, any questions? No? You good? Okay. Thank you. We have a presenter from Eric, I think.
Yeah, you wanna go?
Let's go. Be quick. 44, that's me.
A week without driving.
Hi, guys.
We'll be super quick. Thank you all so much for your patience and for letting us pop up here today. First, I'll take 10 seconds to just commend you all on your work yet again. It's really impressive to see how much you guys are digging in. I've also been going to CTP roadshow meetings for about a decade, and I've never seen anything like this. So kudos to you, and please keep up the good work. So week without driving, I'm actually gonna turn over to Bemi to give like the real pitch, but just like the overview. I'm sure you've all seen it before, like a bike to work day or car-free day. So week without driving is similar to one of those. It's sponsored by America Walks. It's a national thing, September 30 through October 6th. And they partner with locals to do their own sort of thing and to challenge elected officials and policymakers and folks who are in sort of like decision-making authority roles over transit. And sort of just like over public decision in general to sort of have that rider experience and better understand that for when they're making decisions. And I just heard your rider experience group hasn't had a chance to meet yet, so maybe this would be a good opportunity to go out there and experience the ride. So I'll let Bemi from No Boundaries Coalition sort of take it away. This is like her brainchild and she's done all the work for this, so.
Hi, guys. Hello, hello. Yes, okay, not a problem, thank you. Hi, guys. So my name is Bemi, like you mentioned, I am from No Boundaries Coalition, and I'm the Transportation Community Organizer. So I was hired for exactly that, to help make sure that community is involved in these discussions, updates, conversations that are happening. So real quickly, I'm just gonna read through my initial ask letter that I sent out and just give you guys a quick synopsis about my action plan. So my action plan is called Put Your Seat Where Your Mouth Is. And so elected officials will be riding public transit with local constituents. So on behalf of No Boundaries Coalition, I'm writing to invite you to participate in my event. Put Your Seat Where Your Mouth Is during the Week Without Driving Challenge. The event will take place throughout the week of September 30th through October 6th. The purpose of Week Without Driving is to spread awareness about the barriers and challenges non-drivers face and design a transportation system that improves mobility for everyone. We are inviting you to ride public transportation with your constituents to connect and learn more about their experiences accessing work, food, school, daycare, recreation, and healthcare by public transit. A young student who attends Baltimore Design School and lives in Park Heights, a woman who works at Power Plant Live, and a gentleman who uses Amtrak often to visit DC are a few of our citizens whose routes we will be following during that week. They will be available as guides and join on the ride and share about their daily experiences on public transit. You will be given the opportunity to provide a real-time assessment of an overall grade of the current transit conditions to MTA. This assessment will address the timeliness, accuracy of information apps, cleanliness, vehicle functionality, so pay box, information screens, overhead voice, audible, safety, and bus stops. Was there clean signage? Was there a bench? Any type of shelter? The final step of this event is a town hall style forum at No Boundaries Coalition office the following week, where we will report the report cards that were received and have an open discussion with community members. According to the census, nearly 1 in 3 households in Baltimore don't have access to a car. A study conducted by the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition identified the neighborhoods within the Black Butterfly, including Park Heights, impacted by redlining and racial discrimination have the greatest need for transit investments. Transit investments are critical to improving public health and access to key destinations. It is important for our state and local decision makers to understand the needs of residents most impacted by transportation pollution and lack of transportation infrastructure, including communities of color, low wealth communities, and people with disabilities. As an elected official, you are invited to take part of the challenge and incorporate your feedback you receive into policy action. This event will take place as the Maryland Department of Transportation solicits input from jurisdictions on the Consolidated Transportation Program, the state's 6-year capital budget for transportation. And it is critical that MTA gets proper funding and addresses the needs of their riders. We appreciate your consideration of our request and ask that you contact me to let me know if you're interested in participating. So, like I said, that is the letter that I sent out to elected officials. I have 5 confirmed officials who will be riding: Council President Nick Mosby, Councilman Zeke Cohen, incoming Councilman Zach Blanchard, Councilman James Torrance, and Senator Antonio Hayes have all confirmed and committed to a ride. So I also want to offer the opportunity for any of you all on the BRTC, if you would like to participate that in the specific put your seat where your mouth is ride with No Boundaries Coalition. I would love for you to contact me directly. I can get you scheduled with a volunteer. Or if you all were just interested in taking the Week Without Driving challenge on your own. Like Eric said, this is an annual thing that America Walks promotes and supports nationally. Personally, I am a rider of public transit myself. I do not have my own car. I have a 13-year-old daughter who is getting ready to start using public transportation to go to her aftercare programs as well. And so I think it's very important when we're talking about these funding and things of that nature and the needs that we have, that we remember there are basic level needs that people address on a day-to-day basis when we interface with these systems. We're talking about changing buses, we're talking about light rails and all of that. And when I get on with my daughter every single day, the first thing that happens is she checks all the seats, because she's not about to just sit down, because they're actually very unclean and very unpleasant if you just sit down. So even as simple as the cleanliness and comfortability of these systems, I think is very important to keep in mind when we're telling people we're gonna add new systems and more in our city. And especially when we look at the budgeting and funding and where it's allocated, making sure that those basic needs so that the systems are usable and enjoyable for people on a day-to-day basis is important.
Thank you very much. I'm out of town for a big chunk of the time, not all of it. Assuming that my schedule works, I'll commit. I think I already have, but I'm recommitting
Absolutely.
to do a ride. And if other people on the commission are so inclined, we'll figure out how to, through Don, get back to this check.
Yes, sir. And actually, I believe Don has my email address. I'll make sure I get that to him again, but anyone is, like I said, welcome to email me directly if you'd like to join.
Yeah, the commission meeting is that Friday.
Yes.
Is it a national initiative or is it a state initiative?
So America Walks has a national initiative. So they actually are asking people across the country to do this. And then you're allowed, like people can join in and do their own programming locally.
A lot of state that can do something out of state.
Absolutely, I'm here for that.
So I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your leadership on this.
Thank you.
So I know that we are really past our time. We have an opportunity for public comment. If people need to go, of course, please do. We will stay in session, at least I will stay. I think others can stay for a few, to hear if other people have something to say to the commission. So Don? Do we have?
I think Danielle is asking to speak. So
Yes.
other than that, I don't think we have anybody.
Okay, Danielle,
I'll make
please.
it quick. I know it's been a long meeting. Hi, I'm Danielle Sweeney with the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance. And I just want to tell the commissioners that Eric Norton, Brian O'Malley, and myself have asked Administrator Arnold for a status report on all of the 53 light rail revenue vehicles, because we are concerned, given the poor vehicle availability right now, that
the vehicles might not be able to last for the next 6 to 8 years until the full light rail fleet is transitioned. We will provide a copy of the status report to you when we receive it. Thanks.
Thank you. And thanks as always for everything CMTA is doing to advocate. We appreciate it. Eric, thank you. Thanks. Don.
We have Dan.
Privis, yes. Thanks. Yeah, Dan Privis. I just wanted to comment on there's as we go through this budgeting process, I've noticed throughout this discussion, it seems to be there's been the comparison between WMATA and the Baltimore region. And just the structure of this whole commission tends to take our eyes off the prize. And we're not talking about whether DC or Baltimore gets the money. The big fight is between roads and transit. We only had really one question that kind of went to the point of how transit is the thing that is going to transform our society and get us where we need to be in terms of energy consumption and climate change. And just, we need to get away from the idea that it's somehow splitting the money between WMATA and Baltimore. And it's between roads and transit. We're the Baltimore Regional Transit Commission, and the transit needs to be the focus. And if we need to do this in terms of the overall structure, I'm glad I saw the New Jersey Transit was mentioned, but New Jersey Transit is a statewide, includes the New York City area and the suburbs of Philadelphia. And our ultimate goal, I believe, is not to have a Baltimore Regional Transit Commission, but a Maryland Transit Authority that includes WMATA and what is now MTA Baltimore. And we need to be moving towards integration, especially to hit the 4 communities that are being missed. When we look at DC, we're missing Annapolis, we're missing Laurel, we're missing Columbia, we're missing Frederick. And those are the communities that need to be brought into a regional transit authority over time. This isn't going to happen overnight, but I just wanted to hope we keep our eyes on the prize, that we're looking for regional transit for Maryland, and it's not Baltimore versus DC. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Don, anybody else?
Jed, he's on Zoom.
Yeah, we have one online, Jed Weeks.
Thanks, Don, and sorry I couldn't be there in person. Just really quick, I was just going to encourage the commission to look at a couple particular things in their analysis of the CTP. So as you're drilling down on it, it's really great that they're preserving like core safety needs, but with system preservation, you know, a lot of that deferred maintenance stuff can impact reliability pretty significantly. And I think it would be great to ask for an analysis of, you know, what those deferred maintenance projects would do in terms of, you know, reducing reliability of the system. And then just looking at the actual like cash crunch, if we can't program retrofits, you know, how will that affect existing grants? Like, will we have to cancel the light rail car order and return that federal grant if we could in fact not program converting all those stations to low floor? And then, you know, how would that deferred maintenance and continued deferred maintenance affect our competitiveness for shiny new things? So like the federal capital improvement grant process for the red line, like, are they going to look at us not being able to preserve our existing system and negatively, you know, factor that in for our competitiveness for the red line funding? And then finally, how does that state cash crunch impact formula funding? So like how many free federal dollars are on the table that we're, you know, potentially leaving on that table because we don't have that local match? So I just encourage you to ask those questions and think about that in the future context. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
I think that's all we had.
All right. Well, let me just thank Holly, you and the entire MTA team for always doing a great job participating and giving us information. We especially thank Deputy Secretary Samantha Biddle for being here and being part of this conversation. We really appreciate your engagement. Lots to do, but if there's nothing else for today, I'll take a motion to adjourn. All in favor, aye. Opposed, nay. Adjourned. Thank you all very much.